Making movies is hard. Of course it is. And not everyone makes it to the finish line. Some barely even cover a lap. But sometimes a movie just being conceptualized makes it real enough, and there have been a lot of unfinished movies. Some never deserve to see the light of day, but sometimes there are real gems, masterpieces that never got made because our timeline is cruel sometimes. Here are, at least in my opinion, 8 cancelled masterpieces that you'll wish had got made. So kick your feet up, grab a hot chocolate and a blanket, and sure, let's rank them as we go. Let's instead use this open slot to discuss the movies that never saw the light of day. Popeye! Look at this art style. It's the perfect bait for viral YouTube videos. Well, it is a viral YouTube video. Kinda makes sense, really. Released back in 2014, this was a representation of a real project. And if you couldn't already tell by the style, it's got that Hotel Transylvania vibe all over. Because it is Hotel Transylvania. Or shall I say, it was produced by pretty much the same people. This unreleased Popeye movie was a proposed film to be made by those wishy-washy guys over at Sony Pictures Animation, and the director of this short is the actual director of the 3, or I guess going on 4, Hotel Transylvania movies. And though Sony Pictures Animation does get a lot of slack, if I'm being totally honest, I really dig this clay-like slapstick style. And for translating an archaic 2D animation icon, I think it works pretty much immaculately. So what's going on? What happened back in 2014 that led us to talking about it now? So, this video wasn't a preview. Through the words of the director himself, it's not a clip, it's not a trailer, it's nothing from the actual movie, it's just something that kind of represents what we wanted to do. It was just kind of a demo, a proof of concept idea, and boy did it take off. At the time of writing this, the video smashed beyond 20 million views across several different channels, and people were hyped for it. With so many other old school icons reimagined and brought into the next century, to varying degrees of success, I guess, this seemed like a great outlet for Popeye to work too. And it's been a while since we saw him as a mainstream character. Planning to be helmed by director Genndy Tartakovsky, previously known for all sorts of legendary works like Samurai Jack, Dexter's Laboratory, Hotel Transylvania of course, and really a good chunk of my Cartoon Network childhood. This guy's earned both Emmy and Annie Awards for his stuff, so clearly, he's a big deal. This Popeye project was first announced back in 2012 and brewed for a good 2 years until that sneak peek premise short thing came out. Though the premise of the actual plot remains unknown, it didn't really matter. With it being a revival of Popeye, it was likely to not stir too vastly out of the established standards, it'll just be in movie form, you know? Though there's certainly been a lot of variations for Popeye over the decades. With Popeye debuting in a 1929 comic strip, the guy's been about for 92 years. Whether he's having a battle of wits against his rival in a love triangle with Bluto, fawning over love interest Olive Oil, defending her from pirates aboard his ship, handling a baby version of himself or an elderly one, the biggest trademark consistently, after a bit of time tying every canon together, only came with his pipe as a versatile tool and a can of spinach to get out of every sticky situation. I was wondering how one would tackle the obvious tobacco controversy on such a child-friendly character, but apparently he hasn't used the pipe to actually smoke since the 70s, so I guess it's already solved. It could just do everything else instead. So while the story didn't really matter, the other details we did have for this project was that casting choices for at least the demo had voice icon Tom Kenny, who you probably know mostly as SpongeBob SquarePants, how fitting for an ocean tale, though he's also done all sorts of other things too. Video games and cartoon series galore. I don't even think I can properly quantify with my words how much stuff this guy has contributed to, so I'm just gonna let you scroll through the IMDb page for a minute. And then for the role of Olive Oil, by the way, I love the name, went to Grey DeLisle. A little less prevalent on her IMDb page, but it certainly seemed to work for the short. You don't need celebrities everywhere. This is a well-known opinion of mine. So where did things start going wrong? Well, it's a handful of things, but the true inciting incident began with the hacking scandal of 2014 on Sony Pictures. Did you know about this? So what was going on was that the studio was hacked by a group calling itself the Guardians of Peace, and this was in response to Seth Rogen's upcoming and awfully controversial movie, The Interview. This project was a comedy about a couple of guys getting the opportunity to give an interview with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and with the CIA moving in to attempt an assassination on him. Yeah, not really where I was expecting to go when digging up about a Popeye project. Anyway, the hacking group wanted the movie to be pulled from release. It never was. Still, it caused a rupture in the studio and led to a loss of focus on many of its other projects, including Popeye. From here, Sony Pictures decided to reshuffle itself, with some of the biggest changes being to go for the president of Sony Pictures Digital Productions, Bob Osher, and his enabler and controversy-ridden co-chair, Amy Pascal, and replacing them with former Dreamworks producer Christine Belson as president of Sony Pictures Animation going onwards. With a mix-up on the higher levels, all sorts of projects were reprioritized too. So far, sounding like good news to distance away from political relations and firing racially insensitive people, but the actual business decisions that followed caused a great upset in fans. But first, here's what Tartakovsky had to say when choosing to lead the project in 2015. "We had a proof of concept, we had an amazing story reel all done that everybody loved, the whole studio was excited and the marketing was gearing up. But then the hack happened. The executives were dealing with so much and all this ugliness came out, and it was just the wrong place at the wrong time for the Popeye movie." And with that, Genndy Tartakovsky went on to completing Hotel Transylvania 2 instead, as well as his own original Can You Imagine, which also never saw the light of day. And Sony said nothing. But in its place, another movie was released, one said to be either a massive viral hit with an encapsulating appeal, or a dumpster fire of a jaded view on the public. Yes, I still can't avoid this movie. What followed next and came to replace the Popeye movie was in fact the Emoji Movie. What a disaster. Jax Films' marketing meme was literally like the only redeeming factor. It was of course critically panned and an overall failure. But despite not releasing, Popeye was seen as certainly a somewhat success story in comparison to the Emoji Movie. Other quotes from the director say as such: "With Popeye at least, we put up a great screening, everybody really liked that sizzle, we got a positive reaction. I was in love with what we were doing. It was hard to let Popeye go, but that's the business." There were other factors to the cancellation of Popeye, such as creative differences on whether to translate Popeye or reimagine him anew with like sunglasses and a backwards hat or something or other. But generally, Sony's bigger issue caused the downfall of this small project. But while many people had things to say about its cancellation, Sony itself never said anything. And from an official standpoint, Popeye was never announced to be over. Instead, it just lay dormant, stuck in a purgatory of active development. And now, 4 years on from its original release date of 2016, 5 years on from being permanently paused, 6 years since that old sneak peek, and 8 years post-announcement, that slick Popeye movie is coming back. Though we're calling it uncancelled on the channel because my different series merged too much anyway and I retired the Coming Back series. That being said, there's a few caveats to this revival. For a start, this animated Popeye is being reworked with King's Features Syndicate. These guys are made for the ancient animations of the Fleischer era. They're the ones who own the Popeye brand, along with all sorts of other classic cartoons and comic strips like Betty Boop, Flash Gordon, The Phantom, Beetle Bailey, and Mandrake the Magician. I'll admit, it's just a tad before my time personally. But still, things are moving ahead. And more to that, Genndy Tartakovsky is back on board too, as of May of 2020. King Features, as a small animation studio, have been best known for creating projects based around classic cartoons, and now this massive Popeye project is back on the menu. For the character's 90th anniversary in 2018, it was these guys who released a series of 2D animation shorts entitled Popeye's Island Adventures on YouTube. A
tad different to the usual canon, but hey, it's a 90-year-old IP at this point. King Features are also the guys working on the Cuphead Netflix show on the side too. They're just your go-to 1930s-esque animation studio. So one way or another, I'm certainly keeping an eye on these guys. But while hype is likely to be in overdrive after the impression of that old Sony demo, it should be noted that this is being reproduced from the ground up, and though Tartakovsky is back, they're starting all over again. And it is worth noting that it will also not be necessarily sharing the same style as that Sony test for the material. But you can expect with the same director and the obvious impact that the original take took, there will be a good bit of influence to do Popeye as we would probably like to see him. Though there's no word yet on what stage of development exactly this redone Popeye production is at, we do know the movie is set for release in 2022 and was re-announced just a year ago, so pandemic was somewhat in mind still. Popeye over the last century has appeared in all sorts of formats, starting as a comic strip, moving to theaters when Max Fleischer adapted the comic stories into animated shorts, featuring in comic books, video games, and adverts, as well as all sorts of cartoon TV shows of different canons and movies too. There's the 1980s movie with Robin Williams, maybe not one of his best works, but still, as well as another attempted 3D CGI animated movie that I found could do with a bit of work. But with just a few years off from that 100-year-old milestone, it'll be interesting to see what form Popeye will take now. I'm sure we're all pretty into the idea of that super stretchy slapstick style, if not because it's just nice to see something at least slightly new for something so old. But who knows? Over the years, things have certainly been shaken up, so I guess everything's a little up in the air. At the very least, I'm sure we can all agree that anything is better than the Emoji Movie. Maybe we'd be in a better timeline if this released in 2016 as planned instead. Whatever the case, we'll add it to the list of upcoming movies to keep an eye on, and try our best to burn the Emoji Movie out from our memories. Out of the 8 compiled today, Popeye stands out as one of the very best in my opinion. I adore that quirky art style, and it likely now is dead. But for our ranking today, I'd put it solidly at number 2. Let's skip ahead over to Warner Brothers, oh boy. The Lego movies. Not just the one 2014 film, but the entire franchise. I think it was one of the biggest surprise hits of yesterdecade. I mean, come on. We all thought this was going to be one big cash grab, right? But that first installment turned out to be a fantastic love letter to all things creative. It truly felt like it had the soul of someone just having fun with their toys and making stuff up as they go along. And it was made by WAG, the Warner Animation Group. These guys were genuine competition for once. The guys who otherwise made Scoob and Space Jam 2 and Tom and Jerry. Look, this movie's great, and I think everyone kind of agrees. Warner Bros. Finally struck some gold, and boy did they want to continue that franchise, but you know why we're here. It's time for more of the cancelled series, because the franchise is dead in a couple of ways, and with it, we'll be covering a couple of cancelled movies. But first, let me give you a brief introduction to how this Lego movie franchise came to be. The development of the very first Lego movie began in 2008. Fast forward to June 2010, and Lord and Miller were in talks to write and direct the movie. Now, these two are the powerhouses of the industry right now, previously working on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs at the time, as well as since doing Spider-Verse and Mitchell's vs. the Machines. Remember those? Truly just in a masterclass of their own. By November 2011, Warner Bros. Had greenlit the movie with a planned release date in 2014. Taking on the animation co-director role and editor on the side was Chris McKay, director of Robot Chicken, and later doing The Tomorrow War as well. But with that stop-motion knowledge, Chris would be another staple for that Lego movie vibe that it has. In March of 2012, Lord and Miller revealed the working title, Lego, The Piece of Resistance. Yeah, that didn't stick. As well as a storyline that did. Alright. And by June 2012, Mr. Mario himself, Chris Pratt, was cast as Emmett. We had no idea where this was going to spiral in that time. Anyway, Will Arnett also became the Lego Batman, and it all went on from there. The first movie was a super hit, but I don't need to tell you that. With Warner Bros. Finally taking a W, they spiraled out 1 million productions out of this IP, including a bunch of shorts I didn't realize. You got Batman's a True Artist, Michelangelo and Lincoln, History Cops, and Enter the Ninjago, all popping up as little add-ons of what we've already established. You know, maybe I should spend some time looking at shorts sometime this year. We'll see. Anyway, along with all these new expansions, another project bloomed within the midst of it all, and in March of 2015, Warner Bros. Announced that a third LEGO movie spin-off, The Billion Brick Race, was in development. This would have been the first all-new spin-off property to add to the LEGO brand. Cool. Making it kind of closer to the first LEGO movie than every other project, which, you know, leans on an already established IP. Now we're going to continue going through all this LEGO movie franchise stuff in chronological order, but as a bit of a visual clue, when we're hopping specifically on this racing movie, the background border will be turning to this shade of red. We're trying new things for this series. Do bear with me, and let me know if you hate it. Then in 2016, we got one final short in the form of The Master, before news popped in July 2016, Jason Segel arose, along with Drew Pearce having signed on to this new race project as director and co-writers. Specifically, Jason wasn't directing as much as articles said he was at the time. Anyway, you recognize this guy. He's done stuff like The Muppets, How I Met Your Mother, and on the writing side of things, also The Muppets, and most recently Windfall. Nice. As for Drew Pearce, he's done Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, Fast and Furious Hobbs and Shaw, Iron Man 3, and Hotel Artemis. Progress clearly was going, but we'll hear about what plot they put together still in a little bit. Anyway, we needed another major movie for the general LEGO franchise, and thus came the LEGO Batman movie. Also a fantastic hit. The first movie was received with a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, and Batman kept up at a nice 90% in 2017. Following that was all the more shorts. Dark Hoser, Batman is Just Not That Into You, Cooking with Alfred, movie sound effects, How Do They Do That? And then, not a few months later, post-Batman, we got the Lego Ninjago movie. Oof. You know, I've heard from a friend that this is actually quite underrated and they really like the Edgar Wright-esque foreshadowing happening in one scene, but it did not keep up with the previous works, getting slapped with a 56% from audiences and a lot of mixed reviews. The momentum was falling apart, either from a lack of novelty or just the IP chosen. But the machine kept whirring. Sharky Shark in Which Way to the Ocean, Zane's stand-up promo. Are these well known? I'm personally doubtful on that, but by this point in the timeline, we've reached August of 2017, where back to the Billion Brick Race, it was announced that George R. Gutierrez was hired to replace Pierce as co-director. Ooh, dramatic already. And at that time, the film was scheduled to release on May 24th, 2019. But clearly, this racing movie was having a bit of a false start in places. The rest of the LEGO factory continued to mass produce. Emmett's Holiday Party, Unikitty got their own TV series started. By February, Gutierrez had left the project. Oh, never mind. What? Yes, just 6 months later, and George had already left. Things really ain't looking good, are they? But the removal wasn't necessarily out of creative conflicts or drama like that. We instead got some direct clarifications a little later that explained the situation like this. I left the film in 2018 when I didn't think it was gonna get made. These days, time is a precious thing to me, so if I don't think something is gonna go, I instantly leave. That's quite a brutal take, but I guess I can kind of respect that. Even still, we've heard nothing of this movie, and actually, a lot of it we hear in hindsight now. But with George's exit, we have some of his tweets and quotes showing how the plotline was to go, as well as some concept art on the side. So let's have a look into just what there was with the Billion Brick Race. First, Drew Pearce took back his previous role and went on to announce that the movie was a LEGO racing movie inspired by pre-existing racing films, including the likes of the Cannonball Run. The Cannonball Run? The Cannonball. Oh! Releasing back in 1981, it's your kooky, cartoony racing movie with a bunch of quirky characters not limited to a young Burt Reynolds that looks exactly like Pedro Pascal sometimes. What?
Let me see your driver's license, please.
So I hope this bit wasn't going to be adapted to the LEGO movies. Anyway, the Billion Brick Race was intended to send references to all sorts of 80s and 90s cop and action movies. Bit of a Weird choice, but hey, if it works for modern kids, I guess it could have worked. I'm less certain in concept, but the imagery changes my mind. Let's have a look at this. First things first, from Gutierrez's Twitter, we have this lineup of a bunch of intended new characters. Definitely a mutual vibe amongst most of them, being that punky biker gang aesthetic. Though you've also got Wheelchair Guy for some nice representation, this winged wrestler guy who I've heard compared to the Nexo Knight Lego sets in a couple places, and a couple of archetypes as well. Some of these also get extended character sheets. Tobin, the cool guy, just kind of reminds me of Daniel Radcliffe from the Playmobil movie. Yeah, remember that film? Frankie, tough punky girl. Brody, tough biker guy, but with a car, not a bike. Tough guy, obviously tough guy. FBI director and built like a gorilla, okay. Jane the secretary, also Jane the mechanic. Secret identity, or just, you know, Jane and the cooler Jane over here? I don't know. Mr. Wonderful, he looks like a lot of fun. Honestly, this lineup definitely gets those wacky races vibes, or Cell Damage if anyone remembers that. Just such cartoony characters all brought together on the same prompt. Then the only other concept art that can be found is this physical photo of a collage from the movie. It's not about how many bricks you have, it's what you do with the ones you've got. A nice message. And actually, kinda like the Cannonball Run, the rules for vehicles are open. Sometimes people are flying, sometimes they swim. This race is actually, again, looking like wacky races, or something with a side of Sonic Superstar races. I mean, it's very Lego to customize on the fly, and would certainly open up to some creative options that way. And actually, some of these sets look great. A city with an engine set piece and a giant Coke bottle, of course. Your classic stadium congregation, moonlit monsters, a mechanical castle, explosive bridges, the set of La La Land, a portal to Lord of the Rings, apparently. I actually really like how over the top these movies have room to play around. I mean, is that SpongeBob and Homer Simpson in the background? You've got a bank robbery, a view of the kooky cars, this gorilla is in a couple places with his banana car, a sunset vineyard, Mayan temples and dragon, volcano tropics, and seemingly these two are our main protagonist if I had to guess, if this isn't just one big ensemble show. Having your classic sunset romance scene and several duo shots. Actually, the more I look at it, the more I see how cool a Lego racing movie could have turned out, as there's room for so much variety and creativity, and just some really cool and hectic characters as well. But alas, things got in the way. But before we reach that final nail in the coffin, here's how the rest of the LEGO franchise was coming along, as while this project was blowing out steam, another future production had begun, with the LEGO Batman being announced a sequel in December of 2018. Chris McKay again confirmed that the sequel was in development and that he would return to direct the film after doing the first LEGO Batman movie. But on a general scale of the LEGO movie franchise, by this point it was finally time to bring up the rear on the slowed momentum, where all the stakes were added. The LEGO Movie 2, the second part, finally released. Also, underwhelming. Kind of. Audiences seemed to like it. It got an 84%, but it just wasn't bringing back the returns that it used to. The LEGO Movie franchise had officially lost steam, especially with two movies stumbling behind on itself, Ninjago and Part 2. And so, things weren't looking good. The LEGO Batman sequel, though, had some details we hadn't heard yet, coming out a little more later down the line, but it was eventually revealed that the script was being written by Michael Waldron and Dan Harmon. Notable for the likes of Rick and Morty, of course, but also from Michael, there's Loki and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. And from Dan Harmon, also Community, but you probably knew that one already. At one point, Chris McKay went on to say that Dan and Waldron had done a first draft of the script that was really great. It was truly epic, both from an action standpoint and from a story standpoint. I don't know why he's got that voice, but he does now. This LEGO Batman sequel was stated to have taken notes from The Godfather Part 2, because of course it was, as well as Boogie Nights. The film would have focused on Batman's relationship with the Justice League, particularly Superman, and his main antagonists would have been Lex Luthor and OMAC. I assume that's how you say his name. I don't know him. All to be tentatively called LEGO Superheroes. I've also got here a few extra quotes from McKay that have all the more specificity. The film was to be about the Justice League and where Batman was in terms of the Justice League now, and the struggles they were going through, as well as flashing back to how the Justice League came together. It would have also featured Batman and Superman's relationship, as well as Batman's relationship to a lot of the other members of the Justice League. And Robin, obviously. There was a really great plan for Robin. I wish there was a way for us to go do that movie, because that would have been a lot of fun. And on a thematic front, while the first Batman movie was about Batman's relationship with Robin and touched on themes like parenthood, the sequel was more about friendship and change. It was about how hard it is to change, to commit to change, to stay on the new road you've carved for yourself, especially when maybe you weren't such a good guy to your friends. Your old friends might not be able to see the new you. They might still live in the past. Oof, that's quite a strong theme to get onto paper. However, it of course never came to be. Why? I think it's pretty clear. The Lego Movie Part 2 released and it stumbled its way through. The Lego Movie franchise had officially hit a Lego brick wall, and Warner Brothers decided to pull the plug on their deal with Lego due to these diminishing returns. People just weren't as into it as they first were. But this isn't the end for Lego. It is the end for Warner Brothers, but actual Lego movies will continue, as the Lego Group soon went on to sign a distribution deal with Universal Pictures, giving them a 5-year window exactly the same as Warner Brothers. What this means is all sorts of Warner Brothers characters will not be carrying over like the original cast of the Lego movie or all of the Warner Brothers IPs, but Lego as a brand can continue on under another company. What this means is the Lego Batman sequel is absolutely dead in the water. McKay went on to say that because Lego has left Warner Brothers and is now over at Universal, there probably won't be a Lego Batman sequel, unfortunately. I'm so sorry to say that I don't think they'll be making a Lego Batman 2. Instead, the final Warner Brothers project ended up being the Uni-Kitty TV series that started in 2017 and eventually ended with the Birthday to End All Birthdays in 2020. And all other ties faded away. Although the Billion Brick Race movie maybe has a chance, as this was stated to be the first spin-off comprised entirely of an original IP for the Lego brand. So though absolutely nothing is confirmed, everything could line up for Universal to pick this one project back up, as it's a Lego branded thing, not Warner Brothers. But I guess we'll just have to see. At the very least, there is no Lego Movie 3. We'll see no more of Mr. Mario's Emmett any further, and all those DC connections will not continue as the Lego movies go in a new direction under new management. Let's just hope the passionate soul of creativity continues on, and this doesn't revert to how we all expected the Lego movies to first be, a cold, 90-minute collection of cash grabs. But I guess we'll just have to see what 2022 grants us. Lego Batman was expected in 2022, but that's just not our timeline. Fingers crossed, maybe it'll have the same novelty again as 2014. Who knows? It could be Jaws, Jurassic Park, Casper, Back to the Future, E.T., any of the Dreamworks lineup, or the Minions. Oh god.
Considering the real reality of where Lego went next, in fact they've even announced this new Ninjago project, but in live action, I think I'd say I'd have preferred this route. At least Piece by Piece is creative. But despite my praises on the larger picture compared to its rivals here, the Lego movie makes it to ranking slot number 4. Pretty good. So now let's move on to the rare TV series cancellation. Yep, you heard it right. The cancelled Cuphead show. This has been a prompt that's been requested to me for months and months and months to me at this point, and to be honest, I've been a little bit hesitant about touching this subject because cancellations often don't have such a clear full stop that, hey, it's officially cancelled now. Really, what it is Season 4 of Cuphead is unconfirmed and unannounced. It's been unconfirmed for a long time now. There has been no renewal out of Season 4, and there's always room for hope, right? At the same time, the last real update was November of 2022. It's been over a year and we've heard nothing. So while I'm sure there's still room for Netflix to pull the rug from underneath me, looking at all the evidence, I think it's fair to put a note on this that the Cuphead show is officially cancelled. And it's disappointing, right? The idea of a Cuphead show is absolutely brilliant. Seeing this unique sort of slightly old-timey cartoon series, being able to expand into all of these 2D animated characters as well from the games, there's all sorts to bounce off of. You got some great elements of humor and some interesting prompts you can take on with. Like, it's like a spin-off Mickey Mouse done in a different way that's very, very fun. And Netflix made some choices when it came to the Cuphead show. Some of it grand, and some of it not everybody's cup of tea.
And at the end of it, what we really get is a bit of a bittersweet tale of just classic animation scummy behavior. That's what it is, really. This Cuphead show lingered through the worst of Netflix's animation antics, and I think this is the perfect poster child for going through these tumultuous times. So let me tell you a little bit of the behind the scenes of the Cuphead show, right? Starting in the early months of 2022, practically every episode of the Cuphead show is written by the same collection of people. You got Dave Wasson, Deaky Deek, Clay Morrow, Cosmo Sergeson, and Adam Poloian. Each of these people contributing the antics and hijinks and buffoonery that takes place in this weird sitcom show where anything can happen. It's just fun, youthful, and childish, right? Officially created by Chad and Jared Moldenhauer and produced by a studio called Studio MDHR, as well as King Feature Syndicate, all these things come together to translate the video game of Cuphead into a animated for TV format. And the format they chose is a little bit off-kilter to the actual main games. Whilst the gameplay of the games is all about this high difficulty, intensity story of beating up your fellow neighbors in order to make a deal with the devil, the actual TV franchise is a lot more youthful. It aims for a younger demographic. These episodes aren't hour-long pieces with real dark imagery of violence and grim, dark tales. Instead, it is so much more, I guess bouncy would be the word I would use. It's incredibly lighthearted, and more so than that, it is short. Every episode flying by like a little bite-sized chunk because it's aiming for the same kind of demographic as Disney kids. It is like a Disney-adjacent storyline told in the 21st century. And that's a shame, because I would regard the Cuphead story as one that could lead into some really interesting, not full-on R-rated graphic limbs coming off kind of animation, but at least something slightly more darker and grim for a cartoon, which would be great to see. Especially considering the trials and tribulations you playing the characters of Cuphead and Mugman go through. But regardless, it was a choice that was made. Maybe it goes out to a wider, broader demographic. Netflix knows what they're doing when it comes to animation and how to sell a decent story. And so, Netflix bought the show, setting up a system where they went to order a total of 36 episodes of the Cuphead show. There were initial reports of 48 episodes being sold, but I think that was just some misinformation in the early years. 36 episodes were bought, and this is the first note of scummy behavior. Why? Because they bought a bunch of episodes? How dare they give the creators a big bag of money 36 times over? The thing that makes this scummy is the fact that they bought them as one big batch, but they didn't release them as one big batch. If you look at the Cuphead show filmography, you won't find one season of 36 episodes, you'll find 3 seasons. The first season coming out February 18th, 2022, with 12 episodes to its name. The second season coming out on August 19th, 2022, with 13 episodes. And then the third season coming out November 18th, 2022, with the size of 11 episodes. Combine those 3 together and you come right back to those total of 36 episodes. This is dodgy behavior. And it was known. In fact, this was called out during the days of the second season, as there was a hashtag going around for #NewDealForAnimation, requesting for better treatment of animators. Because you see, by buying multiple seasons worth of content in one go, you are underpaying your animators. As was explained in an article surrounding the New Deal for Animation movement, just a reminder that Netflix ordered 36 episodes of this show in one go, meaning they aren't paying these guys higher salaries for effectively 3 seasons of television. It was renewed for season 2 years ago. It's sad, and these guys need a better deal. Yes, that's the way it works. Essentially, if you're being paid for a sequel series, every subsequent season should garner you a higher salary. The price of an episode to buy for season 3 will cost more than season 1. That's just the nature of things as the stakes improve. Around that same time, we also have a quote from Nick Lauer, a Nickelodeon animator, who said, "Season 2 is just the second batch of episodes from season 1. Nothing was renewed. All the episodes were made as one season, and Netflix is dropping them in batches." It's good from a business front if you want to save yourself some money, but considering the money you're saving is being taken away from your employees who are putting in the actual work and labor to build the show, it can't be described as anything less than manipulative. Unless you want to use the word scummy, but I've said it a few times in this script already. Or as a final quote I've also got from the exact same period, a lot of people were talking about this at the time, we've then got Heidi Neuenhofer, also an animator, who tweeted, "This is how many animated shows made for streaming are ordered/released in order to get around all those pesky rules about having to give folks raises on subsequent seasons." And even beyond just the fact that they underpaid their animators to squeeze out more content out of a singular deal, if you notice the actual releases of these 3 seasons, they all took place over 2022. It wasn't even a matter of each season was spaced out 1 year apart or anything, they were all crammed out into a single year. I don't know if that necessarily changes the salaries and the residuals or something to a series show, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something tactical there for the fact that they just blasted everything out as fast as they could whilst taking on the cheapest possible deal. But then, as the 3rd season came out, the nails started making itself present going into the coffin. That's a weird way to phrase that metaphor, but it's there. And there is some debatable evidence about whether Season 3 was even planned to be a finale, as after all, What's on Netflix labelled Season 3 of the Cuphead show as the final season. However, the episodes and the seasons themselves weren't labelled as such. It was What's on Netflix making that assumption based on the fact that no renewal had been made yet for Season 4. Not that there's technically ever been a renewal of the Cuphead show. Going into the specifics of the finale of Season 3 as well, it ends on a kind of a cliffhanger. But at the same time, you could argue that it does lead into a definitive ending, with Cuphead and Mugman ending the series, of the show at least, at a casino. Why would that be relevant? Well, of course, because where does the beginning of the game start? Ding ding ding, it's at the casino, where they would then go on to sell their souls to the devil and be plagued with the debt that they need to return to him. But it's not all crystal clear from there, as there are all sorts of other reservations about Season 3 that could mark things in the opposite direction, as after all, there's all sorts of things missing in Season 3 for it to be a definitive final season. Some loose ends were left loose, like there wasn't a sequel to the episode of Sweet Temptation. I'll be honest, I haven't seen Sweet Temptation, but I'm sure there's a reason it needs a sequel. Admittedly, I only saw the first half of Season 1. I found it to be a little bit too childish, and I couldn't really get around the short time frame, and I didn't have a lot of time myself even if it was longer. It's probably the most common output, but we'll get more to my opinion on that and how things develop because of that kind of opinion in a little bit. But also, going back to Season 3 and its lack of a finale, there's all sorts of background lore from the game that still haven't had their adaptation yet. You can't say you finished the Cuphead show if you haven't even shown someone like Cagney Carnation, literally one of the most iconic characters of the Cuphead cast. Furthermore to that, there's all sorts of other enemies that haven't made their appearance. There's no existence of the Phantom Express, Jimmy the Great, Wally Warbles, Dr. Cal's robot, Beppy the Clown, Hildeberg, Rumor Honeybottoms, or Goopy Legrand. There's way more room for things to be expanded upon, and it just hasn't happened yet. Unrenewed in a way that seems a little bit unfulfilling. And it's not just the fans that are feeling underwhelmed. Adam Paloian, again one of the main writers of practically every episode, has actually got on to tweet and saying, "That's the last of the Cuphead show episodes that we made. There were a heap of episodes that were fully storyboarded, some starring your favorite game bosses, that never got to see the light of day due to budget and time running out. I really hope they can be shared soon." But alas, that was November 2022. And it seems evidently clear that Netflix bought 36 episodes and never bought anything Cuphead again. There was never a renewal of the Cuphead show. It was literally just a one and done, squeezed to look like a 3-parter. Moving on a little bit more on the timeline, when approached by What's on Netflix, another one of the main writers, Deaky Deek, said about Season 4 onwards, "There better be more. I have too many episode ideas. I'm hopeful there's a renewal or a continuation in some form, but we'll see." Since then, there's been hashtags, clearly the crew are invested, clearly there are fans that are invested with #renew the Cuphead show, but it's been a year since that pause. When it comes to Netflix, they didn't pay a rat's ass when it came to #new deal for animation, so they certainly don't care a bobble about Renew the Cuphead show either. Though there have been some slight updates, in 2023 in fact, as the Cuphead show was connected to 2 Annie Awards, being nominated for Outstanding Achievement for Storyboarding in an Animated Television/Broadcast Production, and also won Outstanding Achievement for Music in an Animated Television/Broadcast Production. Who names these trophies, man? Why are they so bloody long? And then even most recently, in December of 2023, there was a poke. They won an Emmy. They won the Children's Emmys Award for Outstanding Directing for an Animated Program. And the Cuphead show still has an active Twitter. Well, I mean, they post once every 1 to 2 months, so by that logic, I'm looking forward to their Valentine's call-out. Now, when it comes to the actual critical response of the Cuphead show, yes, you've heard from the crew, yes, there's clearly a vocal demographic of fans. The actual response to the Cuphead show review this show as, in a lot of places, having about a 7 out of 10 score, with multiple sources explaining that there's kind of a lack in substance. It's kind of short, it's kind of basic and not a great show, just a fun adaptation. It's more aimed for kids rather than the actual Cuphead game material, and even in my case, I watched half of the first season and then I was kind of done, you know? I wanted Cuphead, I wanted characters, I wanted hijinks that make sense and expand my interpretation of the Cuphead world, and it was like a lot of just the devil again. It wasn't so much, oh, I recognize that guy. It was nice to see Porky the bloody merchant man, but it's been so long that I don't even remember his bloody name. Some other reviews that put it in a bit more eloquent words is from Bloody Disgusting, which says it's an ambitiously gorgeous yet empty distraction that's more family friendly than its source material. And then in one form on Rotten Tomatoes, there is, while the Cuphead show fluidly recreates its video game forebear's eye-popping animation, this good-looking vessel is still waiting for some substance to fill it. Now, these reviews and mine only apply to Season 1. It's all I went and watched in the whole thing, practically, other than the footage that's being shown in this video. So perhaps by Season 3, it got pretty good. But all I've really seen is the reservations on how little they managed to expand beyond before they were capped off at the end. What I imagine is with this casino ending, it probably wasn't what they hoped to be an ending, but obviously this was produced and animated while there still wasn't a Season 4 renewal, so it was a fail-safe ending. A backup plan that's a little bit vague, that's a little bit trying not to insinuate it's the ending, but can be interpreted as an ending because possibly the end was nigh. And unfortunately, that pessimism was right. Though at the same time, if it's ended, the king is dead, long live the king. I would love a more darker and grim Cuphead experience. You know, why not flatten it and start again? Perhaps the IP of Cuphead could go elsewhere. There's certainly potential for it. Look at all these characters they didn't use and all sorts of tones from the games that they didn't end up applying with. It's still kind of under the Netflix bandwagon, but if they do manage to sever ties, or Netflix has a change of heart but wants to do a different show entirely, I'd fully support it, and I'm sure all sorts of fans would be interested in it. The next time Cuphead gets back into the trending relevance of the internet zeitgeist, they can hop on it and make another TV show. I mean, it's going to take a long time between now and Cuphead 2, considering how long it took them to make a bloody DLC out of the game, but maybe there's a positive spin. Perhaps the Cuphead show is indeed dead and buried, but perhaps the Cuphead franchise can bloom ever further to new, untreaded territory. Whatever the case, they've had to claw their way tooth and nail through Netflix at their absolute worst point in animation. Cancelling an animated show early is not a surprise. Buying it all in one go and then never renewing it is certainly a middle finger to creators, and squeezing it out in little drips over 3 seasons is nothing short of disingenuous. Season 4 has never been renewed, but then again, we never really got a Cuphead show Season 2. And that is the tragic, yet kind of fittingly dark and grim story of the cancelled Cuphead show. Can't wait for them to immediately prove me wrong in like 2 weeks' time from now. It happened with Peanuts. It happened with the Peanuts movie. Now, Cuphead as a video game is one that I have such high respects for the pushing of the boundary it does for animation. However, when it comes to this TV series, it's only really okay. More so in the sense that it's nice to see this archaic style, but it doesn't push the boundaries in this medium as well. And you know what? That's valid. It's fair. It was an enjoyable series, and one that ran for 3 whole seasons, technically. So given the fact that its fellow peers in this videos have projects that were completely unfinished, and onto the fact that this wasn't even technically cancelled, it was simply not expanded further, I would say while it of course is a shame to not get more content from a franchise we're all probably pretty big fans of, Cuphead is an example of a semi-success story, an unfortunately minimal ending, and against the collection of 8 projects we've got today, Cuphead sits quite cozily at the number 6 slot. It'd be great to see it again, but we ain't exactly craving over it. Time for a switch up now, and maybe a movie IP you weren't aware of at all. Dreamworks continues on to be just an absolute goldmine of cancelled productions. It's honestly impressive the amount of glimmering scrap this company has amassed in the span of like 3 years. With the company very much having a clear and divisive direction these days, reaching this point meant that sacrifices had to be made. And almost all of those sacrifices seem to be some of the most interesting concepts from an animation studio of late. We've lost Me and My Shadow, Bureau of Otherworldly Operations, Larrykins, and now this. Monkeys of Mumbai, also known as Bollywood Superstar Monkey. What a title! And Mumbai musical. That sucks. Still, Bollywood Superstar reminds me of Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go. Yes, I remember all of that. So Monkeys of Mumbai was set to be a computer-animated musical fantasy adventure film to be developed by Dreamworks and distributed by 20th Century Studios. It was announced back a little earlier than the others in January 2011 as a fast-tracking Bollywood-styled musical adaptation of the Ramayana, which is one of the largest epics in ancient literature and a tale of Hinduism. All about a prince saving his wife from the clutches of an evil king with the help of an army of monkeys. There's also, of course, some godly deity stuff throughout as well. Anyway, this Dreamworks project was set to be that tale, but told through the point of view of its monkeys. It would have followed 2 common street monkeys who become unlikely heroes in a last-ditch effort to stop an ancient, thought-to-be mythical demon from conquering the world. And since this was set to be a musical, 2 particular men were attached on to compose the song and score. One, Stephen Schwartz, an classic Disneyan working with the music department on Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Enchanted, and with Dreamworks in The Prince of Egypt for lyrics and original songs, and nowadays doing Disenchanted, as well as composing from A.R. Rahman. An absolutely perfect choice considering their background in all things Indian. I mean, this guy was the composer for the Slumdog Millionaire. And looking at his other works, I might not recognize them myself, but I can see this is exactly what we'd be looking for. I can't imagine the impact that would have been felt from a good Western Bollywood movie on the big screen, especially an animated one targeted at kids. I mean, the influences there could have been massive. My only exposure to Bollywood is through Corridor Crew reactions, so I'm all for representative styles being readily produced. Anyway, a slightly more poignant plot synopsis goes like this. Monkeys of Mumbai tells the story of 2 orphaned monkey brothers, Raj and Deepu, who live a hard-scrabble life on the streets of Mumbai. Raj is majorly disillusioned with the role that life has dealt him. He is pragmatic and puts his nose to the grindstone to make sure his brother doesn't feel the hardship of being cast aside. Deepu, on the other hand, is the ultimate optimist and believes that one day street monkeys, scavengers that litter the streets, will one day soon discover their inner Hanuman, the Indian deity that was once revered by all, and rise to their forgotten glory. That's how they cast through life until a chance encounter plunges them into a magical world of adventure. Actually, there's an even more in-depth description I found that we'll get into in a little bit. So with things starting up and making shape, of course we get our wave of optimistic quotes, like this one from Dreamworks Animation's Chief Creative Officer, Bill Damashk. To reunite with Stephen Schwartz and work with such a celebrated team of artists on Dreamworks Animation's first ever CG animated feature musical project is incredibly exciting. Together we will create a movie that is full of magic, fantasy, adventure, comedy, and emotion, in which inspiring songs and dances will delight audiences everywhere. Shame the first musical Dreamworks did was Trolls. Never an original piece in CG form. Anyway, progress continued to be made, and in June 2011, Kevin Lima had been signed on to take on the directing chair, previously working on the likes of Enchanted, Tarzan, and a Goofy movie. His whole Twitter handle is based on it. He's also been in all sorts of other Disney stuff in other roles. Okay, so having an all-round Disney guy coming from some pretty well-liked Disney movies certainly isn't a major miss. And the role of character designers was plated to Patrick Mate, a real Dreamworks loyalist judging by their history, Kay Asadera, who I found little of from the time, but later gets involved in Alice Through the Looking Glass, Illuminations the Grinch, and Nico and the Sword of Light, and Sergio Pablos, also doing Tarzan and Goofy movie, but also Treasure Planet, specifically Dr. Doppler stuff, and later becoming a full-on writer, creating the original Despicable Me and Klaus. Also, there's art director Ron Cornelius, with a couple duplicate projects and The Croods. But whether or not you like their history, the character designs for this you can see for yourself. At one point, the crew even brought in a group of religious historians and were surprised to find that they were totally fine with the interpretation, and in fact encouraged them to go further. So let's sink our teeth into this. This story synopsis could have just been reverse engineered from looking at the concept art, but it fits, so I'll tell it as we ogle at the art. Oh, actually, it's tweets from the director. That's pretty concrete evidence. Anyway, here's what remains, as even cancelled production stuff can get copyright claims apparently. While swiping movie snacks as an old world theater, Deepu becomes enthralled with a trailer for a film about the monkey god Hanuman. Ultimately, they're chased out by a gang of monkey catchers. En route home, the brothers find themselves in gang territory. The confrontation culminates in a giant Bollywood number, of course, which is danced on the mess of wires that snake throughout the city. After a long day, Deepu falls asleep while Raj sings about how he wishes his life had turned out in another life. The next morning, the two investigate the sounds of the film crew shooting the Bollywood movie, only to be chased again, this time slipping underground to a hidden cavern, a place covered with the sculptures of the Ramayana tale. It depicts Rama shooting his enchanted arrow into the sky, where the golden arrow multiplies and thousands of arrows fall, impaling all of the villain demon's army. And stuck in a pile of rubble is a single golden arrow. Raj is skeptical it's the real arrow and pulls it out, releasing the villain from his resting place. While running again, apparently from the monkey catchers now, the brothers find themselves in the trailer of Chandani, the Bollywood megastar who plays Sita in the Ramayana, and her pet monkey, Pinky. Pinky's a force to be reckoned with, and with her over-the-top personality, she holds the brothers hostage. On set, the shoot comes to a rousing finale, and into this moment rises Ravana, the nine-headed unleashed villain. Ravana is tormented, driven mad by his 9 heads, each with its own personality and all power-hungry for control. Ravana thinks Chandani the actress is the real Sita and scoops her up, magically turning into a chariot and flies off to his island, Lanka. The chase sequence was to be set to a Bollywood version of the Bee Gees' Staying Alive. Deepu gets separated from Raj and rides as a stowaway to Lanka. Raj and Pinky join forces and set sail to rescue Deepu and Chandani from the clutches of Ravana. And with the island in sight, their boat is swallowed whole by a monstrous carp. Inside the belly of the fish, all seems hopeless. Raj is despondent, but Pinky, ever the optimist, won't let him wallow and attempts to lift his spirits in song. Bollywood Superstar is a giant inspirational Bollywood disco number replete with a bevy of backup dancers and singers, and they even glow in the dark. What a coincidence! Back on the island of Lanka, we are introduced to Ravana's mob of demons, each based on an Indian instrument, and become Ravana's orchestra whenever he sang. To which he does here, an over-the-top Andrew Lloyd Webber-esque love ballad, Yours, which can be described as an otherworldly kaleidoscope. Wow. Raj and Pinky fall for each other, in song of course, as they arrive on the shores of Lanka. The song was called Candies on the Gange. Raj and Pinky rescue Chandani and Deepu, stealing the flying chariot, I thought that was Rava, and fly back to Mumbai. It says here that monkeys aren't very good pilots, so they crash land onto the beach of Mumbai, so not all that bad. Unfortunately, Catcher doesn't elude Raj as he is then trapped by the monkey catcher. Deepu goes on to break his brother out and releases all the other imprisoned monkeys. And for our final act, in order to win back the love of his life, Ravana descends upon Mumbai. Raj rallies all of the monkeys of Mumbai, and the climax is set to an uplifting song of rejuvenations. All of the monkeys reclaim their inner strength, saying, "I am Haruman."
But then also, Ravana transforms Deepu into one of his demon army. All of the monkeys form together in the image of Rama, they shoot the golden arrow and send Ravana and his demon army back to their graves. Demon Deepu also gets shot, and Raj tries to wake him up, but to no use. Until he does, because Raj found his inner Haruman. All of Mumbai then returns to normal, all like it never even happened. And in what is known to happen in a Bollywood musical, everyone celebrates in dance. Huzzah! In April of 2014, it was announced that Leah Michele and Rohan Chand were in talks to join the cast from the likes of Glee and, oh god, the naff Wizard of Oz sequel, and the new Jumanji and Jungle Book as Pinky and Deepu. Whilst Chandani was set as Deepika Padukone from Indian films like Chennai Express and Padmavat, and Raj was Aaron Taylor-Johnson. Oh. The project from then on got a little rocky. Originally scheduled for December 18, 2015, its release date was pushed back to March 18, 2016, and then March 10, 2017. Apparently, the marketing department was always nervous that the Ramayana played such a crucial part in telling the monkeys of Mumbai, and they thought that audiences would be lost. In director Kevin Lima's words, the project was sabotaged by Jeffrey Katzenberg, then CEO of Dreamworks. Another source says it was cancelled due to financial disputes, but that source is a little less trusted. Anyway, in December 2017, Lima revealed that Dreamworks quietly cancelled the film in an interview stating, "It came very close. We were just getting into production. We were just starting animation. I'd been working on it for 2.5 years. All the songs were written. The composers were just ready to start. I have to say that it's one of the greatest disappointments of my film career not seeing that one move forwards. It had nothing to do with the movie and everything to do with the politics of selling the studio." Because of course this was during the same Dreamworks reshuffle we keep coming back to. 7 of us, I think, lost movies at that moment in time, with the studio having written it off on their taxes. It means the only way to get it back would be to invest that kind of money again. And it's tens of millions of dollars. I tried. I really tried. Steven Schwartz and I took it around town, but when the price tag was revealed, everyone gasped. Ultimately, we couldn't find a buyer. Funnily enough, almost all of the songs in the movie had existed in one form or another, from rough demos to completed demos with finished vocal tracks and all. But the likelihood of us hearing from them with our own ear holes is essentially 0. And Kevin Lima himself doesn't think the film will ever see the light of day. He says he's asked Dreamworks to revive the project from time to time, but they always give the same answer. Monkeys of Mumbai could have been a really cool, impactful film, I feel. Seeing more Bollywood representation on the Western screen could do some serious good for influential cinema goers and broaden all of our horizons. I could also see it falling into some cracks with our modern outlooks though. Pinky, as you can imagine, would have just about every visual aid to tell us this monkey is the guile, right down to the name, and since the story itself is so archaic, it has some outdated tropes like the minimally contributing damsel in distress actress, but changing that story too much would also feel like a mistake for a first-time adaptation. I also see some general flaws on the extended synopsis. Some parts feel forced or weird, but it was an in-production production, so maybe with a little bit of polish it would form a lot better. Regardless, that was the tale of Monkeys of Mumbai, yet another casualty of Dreamworks and their rebrand to something softer. Who knows how our timeline would have gone if we were more knowledgeable on another country's culture and the movie genre they bring.
It's hard to be a franchise opener and expect a good reception, but I think culturally, this could have been a real impactful movie. But alas, we just didn't get it. And I don't think we've ever really gotten that stark Bollywood animation hit just yet. Even still, today, Monkeys of Mumbai is placed down at number 5, and honestly, that's still pretty grand. So let's move on to the fan favorite you'd probably expect to see today. Of course it is a double bill of episodes about me and my shadow. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cancelled series, because nothing bolsters an existential crisis quite like imagining a world of what could have been. And while in the past we've covered all sorts of Pixar and Disney, video games and Sony, we've only really touched on Dreamworks once, and I think it's worth doing it again. Though actually, I didn't come up with this myself. This was suggested on our Discord by Woodsy and Ryan120, so thank you to you two. Still, yes, today we're tackling one of the most popular cancelled projects by Dreamworks. And really, I'm surprised I haven't heard of it myself. But what makes it so special? Why is it so popular? How was it gonna turn out? And what went wrong? Come join us today as we revisit an alternative timeline of a Dreamworks artistic masterpiece or two. So this film is called Me and My Shadow. It's a real Peter Pan story. Without the Peter Pan part, I mean, mean, it's just that one character dynamic. The production was first announced back on December 10th, 2010, and the part that really hooked people was the artistic concept heralding the entire thing. You see, this wasn't just a standard animated movie with a cool plotline or anything. This was an industry-shaking idea of blending together the, at the time, transitional crisis of the animation industry together. You may remember the Princess and the Frog film back in 2009, or Sinbad in 2003. Those were 2D, the last of Disney's and Dreamworks' animated movies before, well, you've seen the state of animation now. And though we clearly now know where things went, whether people like it or not, the fact remains that this film was intended to still hold on to the 2D ideals in a more collaborative way, as it would have fully blended CGI animation alongside hand-drawn animation. By the simple to think of, yet complex to execute idea of a man's shadow interacting with his 3D self. Honestly, I can understand the hype behind such a concept. That's a great pitch, and would turn some heads, if not just from the fact that Dreamworks hasn't done a 2D film since the likes of Sinbad, way back in 2003. So with us starting on the cusp of the decade, the release window for the film was set for March 2013, and things were going fairly standardly. People started getting signed on to roles such as Bill Hader before he got all involved in Inside Out or Bob's Burger or all the other things he's been in, cast as the Shadow. There was also Kate Hudson as the romantic interest before she was on Glee, and then there was Josh Gad as the protagonist. Believe it or not, he did exist before his Olaf role. Whoa. And as for director, the slot was given to Mark Dindal, who not only also developed the film's concept and story, but previously worked on Chicken Little and The Emperor's New Groove, and later, according to IMDb, he does the occasional story artist work now, I guess. So with the soon-to-be big names on board, where was the script going? Well, it was slated to go a little something like this. Stanley Grubb is an ordinary human who works an everyday job and is overall a bit of a dull dude. Very timid, shy, and not really bold on tackling adventures or breaking the rules. And his shadow wants to help him by breaking the rules of the once secret Shadow World. When a crime in the Shadow World puts both of their lives in danger, Shadow Stan is forced to take control of Stanley. They go on a massive adventure to investigate the crime and stop a shadow villain from leading a rebellion that would lead to shadows taking over their human counterparts in the human world. And by the end of the film, presumably, Stanley would have grown some confidence as well. Also, he had a love interest named Heidi. This goes on a bit of a tangent, but I'm still on board. Imagining Owl City performing underneath is a tad strange, but that's a confirmed thing too. Having a whole realm of the shadows isn't exactly how I would have anticipated such a premise, but it would have allowed for a lot of creative imagery, as is having a 2D character move across a 3D plane, which is interesting enough. But from some of the footage that remains of the film, there were plans to get far more inventive with the spacing of these two-dimensional characters, as well as how they interact with light. The more you try to break down the possibilities of what a shot can do in this world, the more investing this project sounds. No wonder all sorts of people were hyped, and even the staff were. The most vocal of the bunch there come in the form of Matt Williams, a veteran animator who prior to this worked on The Princess and the Frog, Coraline, the SpongeBob movie, Looney Tunes Back in Action, and later Claws and Space Jam 2. He's gone on to say about the project that it featured definitely the most talented animators I have ever worked with in my career. It was great. A small crew where we were all given a certain level of freedom. I was going to be the lead on the villain of the film, but sadly it was cancelled before I could start my first shot. That villain, by the way, was rumoured to be Tom Hiddleston, just scratching the surface of his time as Loki, but I don't think that was ever confirmed. Of course, while most of the film exists only in our imagination, there are scattered throughout the realms of the internet a handful of test clips that can help stitch together the vision of the film at varying stages of development. You've probably seen a handful already. I gotta be cautious because they come with copy strikes sometimes, but even still, I might have learned about this film a little late since the go-to thread on Twitter has been mostly taken down at this point, but I'll do what I can to dig up the rest if it's possible. But you can see some clear ideas in places, with Shadow Stan looking to be a new take on the genie with his transfigurative properties, as well as 2D techniques and approaches that predict some of the stuff we would see in later movies. Though actually it's been interesting to see the more I dig up footage. Like, sure, the shadow changes that one time, but a lot of other clips he remains more on model, just stretched all the time. Or look at this clip where he's in the shadow realm and gets split in half because of Stanley in the real world, where he's not even seen. That's cool. I guess happening when no shadows are cast at all, as some clips show Stanley can hide his shadow by turning off lights. Also, there's all sorts of imagery relating to the town and a motif of light bulbs, which is obviously the perfect location and idea for this kind of film's premise. And part of the technologies that were planned for this ambitious project was to project this 2D animation onto a distorted 3D space to distort along the new walls and angles like they do in real life, which is great. I particularly like seeing the struggle between Stanley and his shadow, with the lamp projecting the lighting in different directions, or how the logic of this world is that the shadow can manipulate their real world counterpart, as we see in multiple renderings across this art and footage. It's just a cool idea. Even a short would suffice for me, honestly. As a brief other thing that did confuse me in a couple places, these characters have multiple names on the internet, sometimes referred to as Stanley and Stan, other times as Daniel and Shadow Dan. Either someone said something wrong once and it got repeated, or changes were made over time. I don't know. Figured I'd throw that out there in case I've been labeling them wrong. Still, the only other element to directly comment on is all this art. There are characters we'll never see, both in 2D and 3, or more characteristics for the ones we faintly know about. Here's the big shadow monster baddie that Stan warns about in one clip. And hey, this artwork got its direct adaptation in animated form. But of course, things went downhill somewhere, and the real rupture started 2 years later in 2012. And it started off, I guess, with what you could call a rival project within Dreamworks, Mr. Peabody and Sherman. Now, this is a film I remember being advertised. While there was no direct bad blood between the two projects, they were both in development at the same time. Around this time, line recordings had started, as there's several staff photographs and confirmation that Josh Gad had recorded his first lines of dialogue on February 16, 2012. And when it was time to pitch both projects to Dreamworks executives, they were much more in favor of the Peabody project as a potentially successful film. In fact, in 2012, Dreamworks co-founder Jeffrey Katzenberg was shown a special screening of Me and My Shadow and stated that it just was not the $200 million movie he had wanted. So with the head honcho's opinion solidified, the release for Peabody and Shadows was swapped so that Peabody's was to come out first now. Me and My Shadow was now delayed to March 2014, the first delay of many. And further to that injury, Dindal as director was replaced by Alessandro Carloni, whose work prior included just The Shark and the Piano short as a director, but Sinbad, Shark Tale, Over the Hedge, and Kung Fu Panda, and How to Train Your Dragon as an animator, story artist, and supervisor. So just a general Dreamworks veteran. And post this project will continue on to the future big Dreamworks projects, and Kung Fu Panda 3 as director. I gotta watch that whole series one day. Still, delays only continued further as Peabody and Sherman wasn't doing too hot, being behind on production, which delayed them onto Me and My Shadow's new slot of March 2014. And then it released, unsuccessfully. Dreamworks as a whole was suffering at this point, and so, as is the story we keep coming back to, Dreamworks underwent some corporate restructuring in 2015, shutting down an entire studio, Redwood Studio City, and laying off 500 employees too. So while in 2013, the initial delays had Jeffrey Katzenberg clarify that Me and My Shadows was not cancelled and simply put back on its development track, this time around, Jeffrey himself stepped down, and the project was officially cancelled.
He said it! He said it!
But not for long. An attempt to revive the idea came about also in 2015, and with a new big name attached to it. Master of woe-enhancing imagery, Edgar Wright popped up, potentially making his directorial debut for an animated movie. Just from seeing the stuff he gets up to in live action, you can just imagine the antics possible in animated form. Or maybe you can't fathom the idea at all. My mind's eye isn't really good enough for this thing personally. Still, the project was back in a whole new form. Things were being vastly redone, as Edgar Wright had been signed on to rework the concept into a new story. It was described as being a new take on a previously developed concept about shadows, and the title Me and My Shadow was renamed to just Shadows. Maybe it wouldn't have been such a me and him tale anymore. The reason I'm so unaware of the details is because while Wright was busy working and even produced 3 drafts of the movie as he claimed in an interview, we never got to see it, because by now it was 2017. and this film can only exist for 2 years at a time apparently, as Dreamworks is now to be hit by a massive buyout by Comcast. Thus more corporate reshuffling was in order, as the goal was now to somehow incorporate NBC Universal and everything else that comes with this kind of business direction. And of course, with such a small, unproduced project like Shadows being amidst the carnage, it was quietly cancelled and never heard from again. And yet here we are, talking about it today, because it is one of the most popular unfinished films in the animation industry. And as we said earlier, it garnered a cult following, despite not even technically existing. I mean, every animation studio has some sort of cancelled project under their rug. The big ones of course being Pixar's Newt, Sony's Popeye, and Studio Ghibli's Porco Rosso sequel, which I'm sure we'll cover those other two at least some point in the series. And also Dreamworks alone has plenty of unproduced projects, but this one stands out for some reason. Maybe it's because of the demand for old school 2D animation to return by some die-hard animation fans. Maybe it's because of the intriguing concept of blending 2D and 3D animation together like this. Or maybe it's because of some of the potentially groundbreaking techniques being introduced with some of the ideas being pushed for it. Whatever the case, Dreamworks has long since changed since the inception of this project. Undergoing 2 corporate shuffles changes the company, and will likely never see a world where this film sees the light of day, as is usually the story of these cancelled projects. Of course, if Sony can revive their animated Popeye, then there's always a chance Dreamworks could do the same with their most popular unfinished IP, but I guess we'll just have to see. After all, a wholly original film from the guys isn't the most common thing in the world these days, as is the state of the industry as a whole. But let's not grovel in the shadows any longer.
Alright, so absolutely yonks ago, I made a video about the cancelled Dreamworks masterpiece. It was probably the best cancelled production I've ever heard of, and based on viewer responses, I think all of us can agree. The fact that Dreamworks hasn't picked this up somehow again years later is a tragedy every week that this isn't new news. And though I made that video a good 2.5 years ago, all sorts of details have popped up much more recently. Now for those of you that haven't seen that video, I'll give you a brief summary of at least the plot of this movie, though if you want to see the full thing, check out the old school video. But essentially, this film was called Me and My Shadow. It was all about a very timid, standard office boy kind of character who has a shadow that comes to life a la Peter Pan. Or Dark Link, I guess. Now his shadow variant was far more extroverted and wanting to get out there in life, such that he would be pushed around by his shadow. Now there are all sorts of animation hints and ideas that we saw expanded in different ways, from the shadow being able to move Dan's actual body around in the real world, to seeing a whole shadow realm that Shadow Dan was able to explore, as well as some really just brilliant animation ideas, like the real world Dan swinging around a lamp, and that would light up different areas of the room for his shadow to appear distorted against different furnitures and walls. A really brilliant idea that just never came to fruition through Dreamworks. This project would then go on to fall into development hell, even being picked up as an entirely sort of new project just called Shadows, being helmed by the Edgar Wright. Now I don't know if maybe Last Night in Soho takes inspirations from Me and My Shadow, but this was very much an idea at one point that it would have been all the more eccentric and crazy designed, considering I'm blown away by just the lamp scene, and that was before Edgar Wright even got involved. One of these days I'm going to find that man again and ask him about that cancelled project, because I was in the room with him once, and I just completely forgot he made this idea. I had the answers in the palm of my hand, if only I was not introverted, shy, and awkward around strangers, and even worse, around parasocial ones. But yes, there were all sorts of other details you could infer from either characters being shown in some of the concept art, or just the design of the office, which was like a light bulb and a factory vibe. That was the general premise, being controlled by a shadow that wants more out of life. Simultaneously, a very simple idea with expansion potential in every direction. So flash forward to pretty much last week when I was trying to grab some footage of that old video for a new recent video. I then came to find that there are supercuts of the animation that far exceed how much footage I used for my old video. More stuff has cropped up in all sorts of corners that I just kind of wanted to showcase. One more expelling of love for a project that we may never see, but I guess there's always a chance. Dreamworks is in a new era of its works after all. Just sometimes there's highs and there's lows, so who knows. So the first shot we see is this Shadow Realmy one here that we did have 2.5 years ago, showing a world entirely made out of shadows that is both obviously kind of 2D, but also warped, distorted, and 3D. Already psychedelic on the eyes, since characters are even
distorting around as they walk in certain ways. Warping into that is then the opening credit title sequence for this movie that I don't think we had so animated in the past, and could very well be what the shadow world we saw the whole time was anyway, with symbolisms of cogs maybe hitting to the theme that Dan is just a cog in the big machine of his totalitarian factory job. Next up, we have another animation test of our Shadow Dan with more of the personality traits of the real life Dan, probably because it's actually meant to be his shadow in this moment. Brilliant design, by the way, anyway, that the Shadow's eyes are like transparent to sell that. Just like a simple character design thing that's very, very good. I should also add though, on this video that I found that supercut all of these clips together, created by a person called Also, just while we're revisiting this episode, there is a big mistake I made in this video that I'd like to clarify. All of this footage here looks a little bit weird because it's been interpolated at 50 frames per second for some reason, and even then, the person who compiled it isn't the person that uploaded it. So the credit for all of this footage combined together goes to Squidward15. They just had the very bad luck of deleting their original compilation, so I only saw this rip-off mixed up one. Either way, thought I should officially clarify that. What an unfortunate mistake. For whatever reason, they also have all of the footage interpolated to be 50 frames per second, which, sure, looks good for animation if you're into high frame rate, but it doesn't actually succeed in elevating the animation quality, since animation specifically works on key frames and special rigid movements. We like Spider-Verse because it was willing to animate on twos so that it could highlight the main poses more effectively. Interpolating frames in between animation just makes warping effects that doesn't really sell what the animators were going for in their animation. Still, that's just how the footage looks. But it's our best source for finding all this stuff, so just have to deal with it. Following this for some reason is a whole dance sequence animation test, again done in 2D, which is likely not meant to be actually from the movie. It's more so just sketch working some of the ideas. You can really see how the interpolated framework does not sell the actual impact of the dance moves. More than anything, this is probably just an animated concept art idea. In our old video, we mostly relied on still images and concept art to sell the image of what we were explaining, so this would have sort of fit right in a sense. Following that, we have similarly another little character test. Now, not on Dan, but what are the side characters? This is not someone we necessarily know. With Me and My Shadow being quite a scarce project that we don't even know what time of development it was cancelled from, the only characters we really know exist are Josh Gad as Daniel, Bill Hader as Shadow Dan, Kate Hudson as Heidi, Daniel's love interest, and Tom Hiddleston as the Shadow villain. And though there are concept arts of two different women and there's only one associated love interest, that could imply that they had a design change, or it means that there's two of them, we just don't know who they are. And this vaguely looks like one of those designs, but not really. Either way, it's an animation test of them being very shy, kind of like Dan, possibly a co-worker at the office, judging by their clothes. Following that is a teaser animation of the dynamic between the two main characters, we've seen this. And then a new running animation for Daniel. There's a couple sketch animations for the cat running around, which I believe belongs to Daniel. And then a new interaction between the two that is just showcasing more of their ideals, again just done on 2D hand-drawn animation, so this is more concept sketching of the Shadow diving into water, and of course making Daniel faceplant. It's such a simple idea that I really wish went further, man. And then another classic one that was seen all the time before, of Shadow Dan saying that they should go and stop a bank robbery, and morphing into different shapes of different people to sell his point. Following that, we then get to a really interesting one of Daniel interacting with the cat, whereby it's clearly taking place at the office, and this is the last couple lines.
Hey, what's the whiskers, mate?
Shadows now arriving from Sector 43.
For a start, the cat apparently talks, which might just be a joke from the concept work, or could actually be legitimate. And also, Shadow's now arriving from Sector 43. I still haven't fully worked out exactly what the job is at the office work. It's interesting. But I guess that also implies that there's 4 characters on screen here if they were all fully animated, since the cat as well would have a Shadow counterpart. Wow, and following this is a shot we definitely didn't get before. I would have remembered this. This is Shadow Dan running through the Shadow Realm, which very much is just like the animated proper title sequence we saw before. All of these different structures and architecture warping and bending, taking 90-degree turns and just unveiling in front of us. This is incredible animation work. Even if it's easily done, it looks amazing, and is clearly meant to be some sort of spin-off representation of New York, since there's at the very least the New York Center train station terminal clock tower thing. And then we get some proper story related stuff. This is Dan fumbling around his mailbox at his apartment, seemingly meeting Heidi for the very first time and just being a complete shy moron. Even his shadow as well seems to be pretty awkward and shy about it all, which is interesting to see. With Heidi very clearly being the thrill seeker that's happy to jump out of planes, doesn't quite match exactly with Daniel's temperament, but hey, it's what they're talking about. The animation is incredibly stiff and could very well just be a placeholder and not actually the plot-related dialogue and how things go, but it's very much more visuals for a project we can only fantasize what would look like. Oh, and here's this. So this is clearly the sequence when the shadow first realizes that they can influence Daniel's real body, since he's clearly looking at his hand as if he did something. This could very easily be straight after the Heidi experience, and now here he is falling down the stairs right at the start. This will then roll into that lamp footage we usually see of them swinging around the room, but these are the early parts. And this is animated proper well, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is legitimately not just concept work at this point. These other shadow-related shots we have seen before with this lamp scene, except for, I think, this pulling one. Oh, you could already, I mean, I love that already. The camera work is just, if it, finished. Although there is also a redo with a different perspective on it. It's all something. And then another one that clearly doesn't work, which is interesting to see, as the camera goes far too wide on the lens. Camera's clearly attached to the lamp, so it's like an actual test blooper, I guess. We then get a mirror shot, which we've seen many a times before. A very good clip for a trailer, I would have said. And then this one that shows a little bit more of the technicalities that go behind developing these shots. With Shadow Dan always drawn on 2D animation, he needs to somehow be warped onto a 3D plane, and this white shape is the square being distorted by the textures of the real world. Even just trying to explain this is just like melding the mind a little bit. A simple idea, difficult to execute, but brilliant in payoff if it actually finished. We then have a very generous gift of an actual animator showing some of the work they did, as Shadow Dan's presumably just walking around his room, enabling us to see a little bit more further into the production for a singular clip, as well as seeing how they layer things out, with yet another argument between the two main protagonists. And after a few more little animation hints for Shadow Dan, who's clearly the easier one to showcase, not only is he developed sooner in the production because he's just 2D, but also he's just 2D, so you don't even need a background, we then come to some more proper 3D scenes, with Daniel not so happily collapsing into this cafe as Shadow Dan pointing further ahead. Along with characters I believe we've seen in concept art images before, such as this little policewoman lady, and apparently a construction dude, and a very interesting looking barista. With another detail coming out from this clip, as Shadow Dan is elbowing a person called Big Charles. That is the shadow to this supposed fireman, seen in a place we apparently know the name of called Roberto's Pizza Paisano. This isn't a cafe at all, apparently this is a pizza parlor, and the main cook is Roberto. Meanwhile, the police officer...
What do you want? Tea! Please, just tea, just tea.
There's a lot more short-tempered. This cafe scene then expanding more as Shadow Dan is giving advice to Daniel, and then Heidi of course pops up, which we kinda knew since this was seen in some concept art. Dan here is shown going to bed with a rubber ducky around his waist, and they start to establish some of the lore briefly about the shadows, saying that a shadow would never hurt its caster. At this point, I presume the movie then goes back into the shadow realm. I don't know exactly how it works. Maybe it's if the shadow has nowhere to go, or it's entirely engulfed in shadow, it becomes part of the shadow world and disappears. It's where shadows go when they're not involved, maybe? Either way, here's Shadow Dan as a cheerleader, which we've seen before. Now expanded for the first time with new lines.
Or you can be a fireman, or a cowboy, or a robot.
Showing the expansion of what a shadow can actually do. They are fully free, if not for the single fact that they are chained down to their real-life counterparts.
Really?
But I don't know what this clip is for. Intriguing. And this one I think is Shadow Dan being summoned back into the real world. Maybe Dan's hand goes out into the light and so his hand becomes a shadow on the wall, and so obviously it disappears from the shadow realm. A lot of this is speculation, of course, because we just don't know. Leaning into another scene we've seen before, but I'm not sure if we had the audio for. Followed by some plot twist reveal back in the Shadow Realm for one final thing, as Shadow Dan spots Shadow Roberto.
Roberto?
Doing something. Although what he's actually doing, we don't actually know. None of the descriptions I can find online talk about it. They just say we don't know anything about him, but something's happening. Here's Shadow Dan hiding within a shadow after being investigated for seeing something bad. Maybe Roberto's shadow is actually the bad guy? No, I don't think so. And then the Shadow Realm itself is disappearing. Interesting. But the music seems pretty happy. as much as it's likely a placeholder, so maybe it's not the end of the world type vibe. Following that, we have a second part to the mirror scene, which I don't think we've seen before, and with some plot details, Shadow Dan saw an evil shadow, but is of course not going to be acknowledged. But yes, the moment the shadow is put into entire darkness, they appear in the shadow realm. That's the rules. Cool.
I need to talk to you.
Uh-huh.
There's this evil shadow.
Uh-huh.
And he's been... Oh, that's not funny, man!
Very convenient that this supercut is put in chronological order, presumably. From there, Shadow Dan is clearly afraid in the shadow realm, and then praising people for doorbells.
Oh, look at you. Ringing her doorbell all on your own.
And then going to try and find Heidi, or Shadow Heidi? This then leads into this clip. This is the clip that actually inspired me to make this video, because I had not seen this at all before. Maybe my memory's just bad. Although there is some concept art of Dan clearly being shown running along rooftops, this is a 3D one of him sidling along the side of a wall of a building, presumably to try and reach Heidi's apartment window, because Heidi needs them apparently. In the main plot, the big bad villain has kidnapped Heidi and presumably her shadow as well, who I don't think we see in any of this artwork, so who knows what they're like. From here, what we then have is a vehicular chase sequence of some sort, whereby the shadows are fighting themselves. Here we actually see the villain, Mac as he's known, sideways on the road having a little bit of a strangle fight, and in the meantime, it's real life Dan on his bike chasing after an old lady. Alright, completely unbeknownst to the sequence of it all. Still, this is proper animation, going very nicely. Oh, never mind, they're not chasing, they're being chased. They get away nonetheless, with Mac able to fully detach from his caster. That's interesting. Apparently, when the old lady is fully engulfed in shadow, her shadow appears in the realm of the worlds of shadows with a dolphin? I think I also heard somewhere that the bed itself is a shadow that can do stuff like ride around like a horse, so God, this world is interesting. Whilst we then jump to Dan working in the office, properly animated this time, presumably as the intro monologue, as the shadow is clearly bored of this life. I guess he really is just testing what light bulbs work and what don't. A perfectly thematic job for a story all about lights and shadows. I like it. Here's one new tiny shot of Dan putting something down. Oh my god, he's headless for a frame. Followed by probably what is the most iconic shot of all of these cancelled pieces, and the moment when Shadow Dan actually manipulates his hand for the first time. Of course, using it to press the doorbell at Hades' place. Maybe this is even what he was complimenting about the doorbell earlier. We then get the lamp shot we've seen before.
Wait, Daniel, you just have to stop.
Though I don't remember them being voice acted by the proper two people last time, so maybe that's a nice plus. There's more shots of the cat seeing more of the flashing lamplight and stumbling Dan at one point. And then there's this shot of Shadow Dan being very excited that he can influence Dan's life since he actually got in to talk to Heidi for the first time, and they're gonna go skydiving, which is something he of course wants to do, and Heidi does as well. Explaining it while being warped in and out of the shadow world as well, just a brilliant piece of directing. Good fun to see all round. What we then come to as well is some elements that are clearly new but not necessarily cemented and confirmed. I do know at the very least there is one YouTube video going around of someone that made their own fan content around me and my shadow clips, which is this stuff here.
Words have consequences, dude.
This is not happening!
I'm not a violent person, okay?
Again, looking perfectly on model and a brilliant piece of a passion project, but now these things may be more fan stuff rather than actual cemented content. Still, for a start, we have an extract of an opening sequence, giving credits to the main characters, or at least some of them, with their names casting shadows against the streetlights. Mixing a combination of both the Shadow Realm's warped, separated architecture and the real-life color palette of the real life. This feels a lot to me like the intro sequence to Monsters Inc., and it feels a little bit choppy in certain places. It does clearly look like images being rigged to move more than anything else. But a lot of these title sequences do have a lot of animation fluctuations to them that make you get away with it a bit more. Maybe it needed more producing, or maybe it was just the style. Beyond that, we then get an entire sketch sequence that is just an absurd display of something or other, where now there's this character called Brock who's like a military veteran combat ranger of some sort, who then drives a car with a parachute. I think this is meant to be a dream of Shadow Dan's, but whether it's actually real, I have no idea either. The showcasing of this kind of format in the concept art is entirely new. We don't see these kind of comic panels before, nor do we see dialogue shown underneath, but it's a nice story of Shadow Dan finally being able to live his dreams of thrill-seeking with a parachuting race car, skitting over lakes. They're all trying to save baby condor eggs or something. Driving around the dangerous mountains and hills and bridges, just doing manly man stuff. Exuberating thrill in a way that the real-life Dan's never going to get, of course.
Whether it's actually real in any degree, I have no idea, but it's at the very least a lot more content to see. It's a shame we still don't get much content from the endgame elements of the story, since we only really get one shot of the actual villain doing villainy things. But with it, you can clearly stitch together a lot of the details. It's a simple love interest with a shadow villain going on the side. Apparently, in the lore perspective, the villain who is a shadow guy, his real-life counterpart Caster, was interacted to him by his shadow and decided to hide himself into shadow for the rest of time to lock away himself and his shadow, and that it's a rule in the shadow realm not to interact with your caster. The reason this villain becomes the villain is that he's jealous of the relationship between Daniel and Shadow Dan for having a reciprocatory relationship between each other that doesn't end in total failure like it has for them. Or something or other. It's all speculation anyway, and not based off of any visuals, because I've just shown you all the visuals they are. I am a very big fan of the concept of me and my shadow, and if there is any project I would love to see revived, it is this. So I thought 2.5 years later it would be worth peeking up a little bit about it again, just one more time, since I found out there is at least a hint of more news to tell. Oh, actually, there's a handful of other ones I found. I also, against all of my research, found apparently a storyboard from me and my shadow about Groundhog Day, which doesn't seem to have any connections to any of the characters other than the fact that his shadow interacts with himself. So maybe this is real life Dan's dream sequence. It's interesting. But then the other little ones we see as well is Mac appearing in another shot, surprising Shadow Dan in the Shadow Realm, who's just ominously there as a big cloaking trench coat figure. And then there's another gag of a shadow dog complaining that his caster actually drank out of the toilet. Beyond that, they explode, and also there are 17 other clips that apparently are out there that have long been hidden. As is kind of the way with some of these cancelled productions, even some of my past Dreamworks cancelled stuff has disappeared. Even still, there is clearly a passionate fan base behind this world, and there's still more to be seen or even potentially revived. I have no idea if Dreamworks would ever do it, but considering I haven't heard a single person dislike this concept and not want to see it, maybe one day when Dreamworks really runs out of ideas they'll do it, or they'll do it as a brilliant passion project for the fans. Yeah, we'll see. At the very least, if I ever cross paths with Edgar Wright again, I'll be sure to poke him about it, but otherwise, that's all we know as a little update for now for the cancelled Me and My Shadow project, the masterpiece that Dreamworks is simply sleeping on. Supposedly, there is a work print going in circulation, but it is very, very private. But if I ever get my hands on it, I'll make a third little details video. Technically, this is multiple movies, but we'll clump them together. They'd get the same ranking of, bloody hell, why didn't we get this? What is wrong with animation? #1 without a doubt. Tier. Revive it, please. I've said all I need to say on this project. I even made a follow-up, and even another year later, doing this compilation today, there's new footage. Here, I'll showcase some of that now. But hey, you know what's better than a movie reaching best of the bunch? A movie that breached out of being cancelled at all. It's Nimona. Blue Sky Studios. Now that's a name you probably haven't heard in a good few months. The studio was always a bit of an underdog. They made Ice Age and never really eclipsed it again, literally peaking at step 1. But even still, while we've covered in the past all the bigwigs, Sony, Dreamworks, Pixar, Disney, this will be the first covering of a cancelled movie from a cancelled studio. Blue Sky collapsed as a company back in April of this year, and their last film ever was Spies in Disguise almost a year ago. But of course, in the before times, there were other plans. And the deconstruction that did happen interrupted a couple of projects too. And today we're talking about one of those that could have breached the surface. Have you ever heard of a project called Nimona before? Nimona was a planned film by Blue Sky, surprise surprise, that was supposed to come out on February 14th, 2022. Though the IP itself already exists, and it's done. In its original form, it is a fantasy webcomic by one Noel Stevenson being adapted over to the film medium through this studio. The plan was the film was going to be directed by Patrick Osborne, previously directing a handful of shorts, 2 of which were nominated for Academy Awards, and Feast won. He also has been doing some animation work for Bolt, Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, and Big Hero 6. Still, it's a full-length directorial debut, and the writing would come down to Mark Haynes, working prior on, these in the writing department, and as additional crew for all of these. I guess it's kind of a gamble on a new team, but there is an award under their belt. I won't be too elitist off the bat, it's just some new territory with a project that's already won its awards. But maybe that's just what makes Blue Sky, Blue Sky. Risk.
Whatever the case, in June 2015, everything was kicked into motion. 20th Century Fox and Blue Sky Studios first purchased the film rights to the critically acclaimed graphic novel Nimona. And as for the plot of the movie, unknown. Or at least, that's what my first source says. But we've got loads of sources, and you can check them all out in the description if you're hungry for more. But here's what some of them have to say. Nimona is an impulsive young shapeshifter with a knack for villainy, who teams up with a mad scientist, Lord Ballister Blackheart, a villain with a vendetta. As sidekick and supervillain, Nimona and Lord Blackheart are about to wreak some serious havoc. Their mission? To prove to the kingdom that Sir Ambrosius Goldenloin and his buddies at the Institution of Law Enforcement and Heroics aren't the heroes everyone thinks they are. But as small acts of mischief escalate into a vicious battle in the hopes to expose the ruler of the kingdom, Lord Blackheart realizes that Nimona's powers are as murky and mysterious as her past, and her unpredictable wild side might be more dangerous than he is willing to admit. Ooh. There is, of course, the entire lore of the webcomic one can go to for more plot details, going on the assumption that this movie is a more direct adaptation. So in order to get the full grasp of what this movie could have been, I'll give you the full backstory of the webcomic. Not through full plot spoilers, but I'll give you a little background detail and a production timeline too, why not? 2012 is the original creation of Nimona, being published on Tumblr by Noelle Stevenson. Beginning as a collection of 1- and 2-page comics, Stevenson has said that at the start, they had no idea what Nimona was when they started it, and that it was still experimental. Even still, soon afterwards, an agent reached out to them, and while still being at school, she learned her agent had sold Nimona to the publisher HarperCollins. Beginning publication in June of 2012 and doubling as Stevenson's senior thesis, this comic then ran from June 2012 to September 2014, with an end that had been realized from the very start. And when finally reaching that point, Stevenson found it to be both satisfying and a little sad. And now we're back to 2015 with that Blue Sky film adaptation setting up. So what is the more detailed plot? Well, I won't spoil the actual ending, but as a general overview of the source material, with a few more details than the film synopsis alone, it goes as follows. Ballister Blackheart is a former knight turned low-grade villain whose evil plots are routinely foiled by his nemesis, Sir Ambrosius Goldenloin of the Institution of Law Enforcement and Heroics. The two men were once friends, or perhaps more, but they fell out and Ballister lost an arm in a fight with Goldenloin and now has a mechanical arm. Because yes, the world of Nimona is one that combines both medieval and futurisms, mixing magic and mad science. Ballister was ejected from the institution because of his lost arm and became a villain. Nimona, our titular protagonist, is a teenage shapeshifter who breaks into Ballister's lair one day and anoints herself as his sidekick. Ballister is a mastermind but is reluctant to kill and carefully follows his own moral code, which frustrates Nimona, who is smart but also conniving and needlessly violent. While the initial chapters follow Nimona and Ballister's adventures and growing friendship, eventually Nimona's bloodlust puts her and Ballister into conflict with Goldenloin. I'm really surprised it's not Golden Lion, but I'm pretty sure it's Goldenloin. The Institute wants Nimona dead and instructs Goldenloin to do the deed. All the while, Ballister wants to protect Nimona and bring down the corrupt organization, and Nimona has her own vengeful plans. Or as the creator describes it, man's new assistant doesn't care for his ex. But anyway, those are the best details of the plot we can muster. How was it actually planned to be adapted? Well, for a start, 2 cast members were set in stone. Nimona was to be played by Chloe Grace Moretz, of the Poker House and Kick-Ass fame, and Blackheart was covered by Riz Ahmed from Rogue One and Nightcrawler. None of the other characters had known castings. And actually, a good bit of details were lost at this point. Apparently, there was once a good chunk of footage to bounce off of that has since been taken down. We do have this footage, but this is 40 seconds long, and that's it. As production continued over the next 2 years, this insider knowledge stayed on the inside. Also at this same time, 2015 still, HarperCollins published the completed comic as a young adult graphic novel in May, winning all sorts of awards that I don't recognize. But there's loads of them. The Eisner Award, Sybil's Award, Cartoonist Studio Prize, all sorts. And come 2016, Nimona was adapted into an audiobook. And hey, that one actually followed through. featuring the voice work from Rebecca Sola, Jonathan Davis, Mark Thompson, January Lavoie. Is that really, was their first name January? Wow. Natalie Gold, Peter Bradbury, and David Pittu, coming together at a runtime of 2 hours and 17 minutes. Meanwhile, for the movie, in June 2017, Fox finally scheduled Nimona to be released on February 14th, 2020. And we have more insider reports of what was happening with the project from around this time. If you couldn't already tell from the source material, this story would have been one to breach some barriers on the big screen in regards to LGBT representation. There's only little spots here and there in kids' cartoons these days, but this would have been one of the biggest examples of really diving into doing it properly, and the same was planned with this adaptation. Employees would later reveal to outlets like BuzzFeed that, in an innovative move, Nimona was to depict a same-sex relationship between two of the major characters, and that I love yous were to be exchanged in one scene in addition to a same-sex kiss. Not to mention, the starring role was that of a gender non-conforming female, a literal shapeshifter. It's a style of characters that we just don't see given the full theatrical treatment, or at least not yet or in abundance. And then, in March of 2019, Disney came in and acquired all of Fox. Did they kill the film? No. In fact, things were still going ahead, even with all the boundary pushes included. This would have then been the very first Disney film to include a same-sex kiss and all of that. Absolutely revolutionary in how it could have changed the lives of kids watching it had it actually come out. Then in May 2019, the film was delayed to March 5th, 2021. Following Disney's acquisition of Fox in August of 2019, the Walt Disney Animation Studios president Andrew Milstein was named co-president of Blue Sky Studios, serving alongside Rob Baird. And other members were switched around, with the likes of the Pixar president Jim Morris also taking a supervisory role as key Blue Sky management Brian Keane left the company. They were shuffling about basically, with Disney's plans going forward to keep the studio going as a third feature animation studio under their belt. Though they also went silent about the company, indicating not so good odds on continuing operations. In November 2019, Nimona was again delayed to February 14, 2022. And on the output front of the studio, Spies in Disguise made its debut, distributed under Disney in December 2019. It didn't do so well, grossing $66 million at the domestic box office and $171 million worldwide. The hope was that a franchise would be spurred by the star power of Will Smith and Tom Holland, but clearly it wasn't the case. But the studio hasn't gone down just yet. Through all of 2020, there was word that the film would be released in 2022. Noelle Stevenson even stated in June 2020 that the film was still happening, and repeated that notion in an August 2020 podcast. However, in February 2021, it was reported that Disney was closing Blue Sky Studios that April, and Nimona the film adaptation was cancelled due to the shutdown of that studio. But it was worse than that. Stevenson said it was a sad day and that she wished the best for everyone who worked at Blue Sky Studios, but we've been hearing the timeline of events here, and the film had been in the works for 6 years. Production was so very much long underway by this point. And though we don't actually have a lot of footage, we have reports that Chloe Grace Moretz, for example, had actually recorded about half of their lines already. And the film only had about 10 months of production left until full completion. Yes, that's right. By the time the studio was shut down, Nimona was left at about 75% complete, which is just devastating. And beyond just the artistic side of things, the realities of the shutting down was also harsh on its employees, with approximately 450 employees impacted by the closure. Disney did say they would consider some open positions at other studios, though all of their other studios were based thousands of miles away on the West Coast, so who knows how that turned out. As for the reason of the closure, it wasn't due to the strong LGBT tones, of course, as much as you can't really trust the mindset that there's room for everyone under the rainbow from Disney. I mean, even another Blue Sky employee pointed out that Disney doesn't have a great track record of making queer inclusive media, though they did note that there's no clear connection between the film's content and the studio's closure. Instead, it all came down to the fact that COVID continued to ravage through the months. Add on to that the response to Spies in Disguise, which, while it was critically successful by critics and fans, didn't make enough money at the end of the day. And as a spokesperson explained, given the current economic realities, after much consideration and evaluation, we have made the difficult decision to close filmmaking operations at Blue Sky Studios. Don't know why he sounds like that, but he does. What an incredibly unsatisfying end for the studio and the movie. Though there was still hope for the movie to live beyond closure, but first, here's some thoughts from the time of the shutdown announcement. Blue Sky was filled with funny, talented, passionate, creative artists who welcomed you in as family. I'm so sad you won't get to see Nimona. We were doing something pretty great. As said by Pamela Ribon, who wrote the script for Moana and Ralph Breaks the Internet. Others stated it didn't look like anything else in the animated world, but they believe it will never be completed and released. Former animator Rick Fournier stated the studio was very close to getting the film finished, but that they found out it simply was not doable. But there was still a chance for Nimona, as it was soon shopped around to other studios in the hopes that someone else would pick it up to finalize those last little bits. In June 2021, May Rude, a writer for Out, said that she still held out hope that this last film will find its way back to life somehow. Fans, of course, are definitely hoping that this will be the case. The Blue Skies library and IP will remain part of Disney now, and that can even be seen from the recently announced Ice Age series for Disney+, but it's also now clear that the series won't be produced at Blue Skies, so perhaps that glimmer of hope for Nimona has faded away too. Losing Nimona, I hope I've been saying this right this whole time by the way. Losing Nimona is a massive loss for the industry. Sure, sometimes there are really cool ideas we just want to see. Sometimes it's representation of another culture that could be really cool to see shared around for people who might not be so familiar. But sometimes a movie like this could have had an astronomical effect on the children of today who maybe need a story like this, to see a part of themselves up on the big screen. Nimona would have been a major first for Disney, even if it wasn't technically a film they made themselves. But still, none of the company's past animated films had featured a queer lead character, or any explicit depictions of queer romance at all. Sure, you have those half-assed attempts from the minorest of characters that make a headline every year, and I guess we're slowly getting better, what with a gay character in Jungle Cruise and Eternals doing its thing, but this would have been the project to truly break through the mold into an unabashed example of inclusion. Nimona has been hailed with many awards and highly praising reviews. It was written by a non-binary creator and represented the LGBT community's viewpoints in its most visceral and recent form. And losing a project like this could be one of the biggest disappointments in recent animation history for many people. Who knows what the final price tag would have been for Nimona? You can bet it wouldn't be cheap, but having no one take this project on seems like a missed opportunity for all involved and approached. Whatever the case, at the very least, the story continues on, in both webcomic form, graphic novel, and audiobook too. The story might not be as mainstream as it could have been, reaching the most amount of people who need it most, but it exists. It's finished, and whenever the next big LGBT project brews, if it does get fully realized, let's just hope it proves all involved that this was the biggest loss these companies faced, without ever fully noticing.
Now, we're going to be placing this one down at the very bottom of our list simply because we don't crave it anymore. We got it! What a win! And while it would be interesting to see how this movie might have come out entirely via Blue Sky Studios, I think the real end result is fantastic nonetheless, and honestly, the only best ending we've ever witnessed on the channel, for cancelled stuff anyway. It's a success to be at either end of our scale, it seems. So let's move on to another high-in-demand cancellation. Coyote. Warner Brothers, what are you doing? Warner Brothers cannot stop giving L's. L Brothers. We were literally just earlier in the week talking about a whole bunch of Looney Tunes movies that are being made into fruition sometime next year. You had the likes of Bye Bye Bunnies, The Day the Earth Blew Up, and hey, Coyote vs. ACME is one we've long been looking into. I even made a full-on video about this a good year ago, talking about this really interesting idea of Wile E. Coyote going out to sue the company of ACME. And not only was it a project we were keeping an eye on over the past year, it's one that's been fully into production. They've made it already, it's already finished, and now it's been shelved. It's been killed entirely, and it's done. Now this comes as a result of Warner Brothers Discovery and its CEO David Zaslav looking to slash costs amongst all of its companies to find $3 billion in savings somewhere because they're in staggering debt. As I said, L Brothers. And this new news of cancelling just another fully finished project follows the reporting of Warner Brothers' quarterly earnings, where they made a net loss of $417 million. This company is quickly flushing down the toilet. And David Zaslav apparently saying the company hasn't really been able to crack the kids. Yeah, and it's not going to if you just delete these finished kids' movies. Fully available for the family to see if you gave them the opportunity. This movie was done, it was ready, it was built off of a $70 million budget and is being completely tax written off. Not for $70 million, by the way, it's for $30 million is what this all comes down to, with a loss of $417 million over the last quarter, and trying to find savings in the $3 billions. This is 30 million, which is tiny if you're thinking about actually making a saving out of that. Not to mention, movies make more than $30 million. Space Jam 2, another live-action animated hybrid, made $163.7 million. Now sure, maybe you can put that to LeBron James and Bugs Bunny and it being a sequel to an already established love classic weird movie thing. But even that $163.7 million was siphoned out by being simultaneously released on streaming services. In fact, all theatrical animations that have been made by Warner Brothers Animation Group or Animation Pictures or whatever have made over $100 million each, with the one exception being Scoob, because that was exclusively on streaming. This movie doesn't have a particularly large budget compared to all the rest, it's pretty standard, and surely it would have made more than $30 million. Now, as I said, we've already talked about this movie last year, so if you really want to get into some extra details about it, I suggest you have a look over to it, but I'll give you a general overview now, whereby the actual producer and part of the story crafting for this movie came from James Gunn. This was a James Gunn Looney Tunes movie, or at least there was certainly an influence there. We also had the main story being done by Sammy Birch, who wrote the original screenplay. With her previously being known for things like being the writer for May, December, and a whole bunch of casting department for Hunger Games movies. That's interesting. Now, this production was to be directed by Dave Green, who was responsible in the past for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 2016 version, Out of the Shadows. And the whole story was to be based on this one 1990s article of the same name, Coyote vs. Acme, that was published in the New Yorker by Ian Fraser. Now, I'm not going to read out the whole thing to you now, but I believe we did in the old video, so check it out. Just a very interesting writing piece. But then with all of that interesting idea, a revival of my personal favorite Looney Tunes character of all time, and just a complete backstab to every crew member and a warning red flag to never work with this company ever again, they announced that it would be shelved and will remain unreleased. In fact, their official statement goes, "With the relaunch of Warner Bros. Pictures Animation in June, the studio has shifted its global strategy to focus on theatrical releases. With this new direction, we have made the difficult decision not to move forward with Coyote vs. Acme. We have tremendous respect for the filmmakers, cast and crew, and are grateful for their contributions to the film." Not only is it weird that they say they're focusing on theatrical releases while deleting a theatrical release, but that final statement of "we have tremendous respect for the people that dug in for the last 3 years" is just so toxic. Now, what they're talking about at the beginning of this here is the relaunch of the idea of having a feature animation division. You know, animated films. And having made a deal with Locksmith Animation, the people behind Ron's Gone Wrong, they're now working together on 2 different projects. A musical called Bad Fairies, and an adaptation of the Lunar Chronicles. I really like Locksmith Animation, and their one movie. I'm so sad they're shackled to Warner Brothers now. There's also some Dr. Seuss themed animations in the work, based on The Cat in the Hat and Oh, the Places You'll Go, hoping to release 2 movies a year, starting from 2026. If they'd survive that long. And despite clearly having a finished project, a solid idea, and other alternatives to just shelving something and not letting it be released in any form, apparently Warner Brothers just didn't see it financially viable to try to sell Coyote Acme to another studio, or to release it on its platform Max. Now, maybe releasing on streaming, I can understand. Scoob only made like $6 million, so maybe that is worse than the $30 million tax write-off they got, but financially unviable, they can't sell it? It's just, it's weird. And it's that's not the only time they've done that. This is a David Zaslav classic. This is the third movie that they have done this to, previously being the likes of Batgirl and Scoob Holiday Haunt. These movies are finished, and they just don't make them. It's not even that they're cancelled halfway through. Batgirl had a budget of $90 million, and Scoob was a budget of $30 million. Like, they're not even massive projects. Just release them. They'll probably make a profit. Especially with the news that this is all lifting up. Everyone's mad. I'm one of them. In fact, it's actually kind of helpful that I'm 1 day delayed on releasing this news because there are so many quotes and resources we can talk about, and we're going to get to it in a moment. But first, another note. All three of these cancelled movies were given the green light by Jason Kilar, the former CEO, until David Zaslav took over. You know, he deals some things 2026 onwards, I guess. Until then, screw it. We'll just dig this company further into the ground. It'll make a more action-packed revival. Totally. It's to the point where I think we all kind of expect this from David Zaslav and the new Warner Brothers Discovery, but what if you're like an actual crew member? What if you actually want to get in this industry? I personally would boycott working for Warner Brothers because your work may never come to fruition, and look how many crew members are left devastated after this news. The film editor, Karsten Kapanek, says that they are heartbroken, giving a special thanks to the VFX team, animators, supervisors, and assistants who all work together to bring the project to life. As artists, we pour ourselves into these projects. The film was me for the last 2.5 years. It will always be a part of me. I even got a Wile E. Coyote tattoo on my right arm the week we delivered the movie before I left London, to remind me of the challenges we face while we pursue our goals. This erasure hurt on a personal level. With this write-off, everything gets deleted. Not just what you see on screen, but everything that it took to make the film. A released movie is just the tip of the iceberg of love and labor. The talent and commitment of the people who bring a project to life should not go unnoticed. All of it is now lost, but will never be forgotten by those lucky enough to have been there. The crew for this movie, by the way, were given no notice about the cancellation and the full-on tax write-off plan until after the process had been completed. Though another source says that the filmmakers were at least given advance notice before the announcement was made to the public, so there's a little bit of a gap there between they cancelled it, they finished the process, crew found out, and then it went public. Either way though, like, John Cena, who was the main celebrity casting for this movie, simply posted a Looney Tunes The End on Instagram. I imagine it must also be quite frustrating that you can't even fully put out your words because you're shackled into all sorts of contracts and deals, you know? Can't ruin your career out of some genuine emotion now. One crew member says that they only learn of the decision when contacted by a news source for comment, saying, "I am disappointed. I was looking forward to seeing all of our hard work come to life." So not even everyone really got the no on this. I mean, it's not really a surprise, is it? Now, naturally, just like with me right now, this news came with a lot of backlash by filmmakers and animation outlets and just all sorts of people. There was, of course, in the past, the Bring Back Batgirl hashtag or something like that. And this is just the same. And it's not even always from people in the crew. We've got a handful of other directors and creators in the industry that have come out to say notes about this. For example, director Peter Artentio, known for the likes of the director for the Key and Peele TV series and Keanu, and an episode of the 2020 Twilight Zone, saying, "This is insane. First of all, a business model that incentivizes this. Secondly, this movie is great. I was lucky enough to get to see some, and it's hilarious with incredible animation. What a disgusting turn of events, especially with a huge gaping hole in the release calendar." Yeah, which is very true. We've literally just come out to the other side of strikes, which have put a massive hole in releasing movies, and now that Warner Brothers has the availability to release a movie with the full marketing power of their celebrities being allowed to help advertise it, and they just eviscerate it. Peter's absolutely right. Screw a business model like this. Similarly, we have Peter Briggs, the screenwriter for Hellboy 2004, who said that David Zaslav has turned a functioning movie studio into a mechanism to pay him an obscene amount of money annually while not actually releasing movies. Yeah, he's truly a genius. David Zaslav, by the way, in case you were interested, makes over $3.1 million a year, as well as stock benefits on top, which made him $39.3 million in 2022 and $246.6 million in 2021. Obscene! That's 8 Wile E. Coyote tax write-offs in a year! I think I've just worked out a great way for Warner Brothers to make a good dent in their $3 billion debt. Now, writer-director Brian Duffield, known for the likes of Skull Island, Spontaneous, No One Will Save You, and Cocaine Bear, tweeted, "I have seen this movie and it is excellent. It also tested in the high 90s repeatedly. It had interested buyers. The people working at Warner Brothers are anti-art, and I hope multiple anvils drop on their heads." That's some serious words from the guy who made Cocaine Bear. But yeah, absolutely a great point. There were positive test screenings and interested buyers. So high up in the general ratings. Not only is it a shame that this movie's never getting released, but apparently it was brilliant. The film being compared to the high highs of Who Framed Roger Rabbit by Ben David Grabinski, the guy behind Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, saying, "Coyote vs. Acme was the best of its kind since Roger Rabbit. It's commercial, it tested well, the leads are super likable, it's beautifully shot, the animation is great, the ending makes everyone f***ing cry. I thought the goal of this business was to make hit movies." It's baffling that somehow Warner Brothers has lost their way so much by just a simple shuffle up of the CEO and just poor management consistently. As another report says that test screen results awarded this movie 14 points above the norm for a family film. But they didn't want to sell it anyway. Surely a release would make more than $30 million. Some more quotes we have from the direct crew of Coyote vs. Acme, from maybe a slightly less emotive perspective, ironically enough, says, "Warner Bros. Is a mess. They obviously are carrying this staggering debt. They probably have certain minimums and obligations they must owe their creditors, which are motivating them to make bizarre choices. They're just not in sync with how the business has been run. It's devilishly destructive." Meanwhile, David Green, the main director for this movie, came out to say, "I am beyond proud of the final product, beyond devastated by WB's decision. For 3 years, I was lucky enough to make a movie about Wile E. Coyote, the most persistent, passionate, and resilient character of all time. I was surrounded by a brilliant team who poured their souls into this project." And I imagine a lot of these quotes are a lot more nicer simply because they are still somewhat shackled to Warner Brothers to some degree. It's a lot easier to be explosive and emotive when you're completely detached from the project, hence why other filmmakers have been doing it instead. But I can't imagine the seething rage that's going on behind the scenes. The premise of the actual plot we learn a little bit more detailed since the last time we talked about it, with basically it going as, after all the products made by Acme Corporation backfire on Wile E. Coyote in his pursuit of the Roadrunner, he hired an equally unlucky human attorney to sue the company. When Wiley's lawyer finds out that his former law firm's intimidating boss is Acme's CEO, he teams up with Wiley to win the court case against him, with Will Forte as the attorney, John Cena as the CEO, and Lana Condor also there, and Eric Bolzer as Looney Tunes characters. Now obviously Wile E. Coyote doesn't speak, so this would just be other tunes. There is actually some behind the scenes footage that I had shared on my Discord server that I got to look at that shows a lot of behind the scenes details and some insinuations that might have suggested, for example, Porky Pig was in there, running around for some reason. But also, while that was released by the crew in response to this to show some behind the scenes, it also got copyright struck down. Bastards. So I probably am not really able to show you. Though it is interesting to note, Eric Bowser also voices characters such as Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. So it could have been a full-on proper references in there, you know? Such a shame, man. Now, film composer Steve Price also tweeted out that he had a lot of fun scoring Coyote vs. Acme, as no one will be able to hear it now due to bizarre anti-art studio financial shenanigans I will never understand. Here is a bit of behind-the-scenes footage of our Meep Meep Roadrunner choir, with apologies to Tchaikovsky. But yeah, I can at least show you this. Here's a choir performing the Roadrunners Meep Meep from behind the scenes. With development first being announced in August of 2018, the full tale really goes as this. Though there were several changes of crew members and writers over the years, it had still been trucking along since 5 years ago. And though this has already long been filmed, with principal photography starting April 1st, 2022, and all filming finishing by May 28th, 2022, the film missed its initial release slot of July 21st, 2023, and on April 26th, 2022, it was taken off the release schedule entirely, with Barbie taking over its original release date, which also, of course, went on to become Warner Bros.' biggest hit of all time at $1.4 billion worldwide, and yet here we still are,
deleting entire movies at the end of them. Surely you'd be able to have a bit more comfort after that, you know? Anyway, during the strikes that came through, obviously, this year, studios were starving for a theatrical production, considering work had been halted by the writers and the actors, and 2024 news has been paused with all these giant gaps. You would expect a new Looney Tunes finished project would be the perfect plug for this hole, especially because it's done. But no, with more crew members saying, quite honestly, we thought it was a slam dunk. I think that's what's so devastating and frustrating. I just don't get it because it's sitting there and none of us get to see something that's so fun and enjoyable. Or on a more personal and anecdotal note, we have crew member Nate Bannister, who said, I was key assistant location manager on this movie, almost died of stress pulling all the permits, we closed down the entirety of downtown Albuquerque, I had to call in every favor of my career to close an overpass with half a day's notice, I got so many angry calls from neighbors, business owners, etc. day and night. Working on this movie almost tore apart my relationship with my fiancée. Why do I work in this industry? Luckily, if there's anything close to a silver lining, apparently cast and crew will be given the chance to see the movie during a special screening next week in Los Angeles. And then, none of us will, ever again. Sounds like a good time for some sneaky yar har, if you know what I'm saying, but hey, we'll see. I mean, hey, if only. But yeah, there you go. There's one more piece of news from Movie News November. Sometimes it's great with a new Pixar movie, and sometimes it's Warner Brothers. And David Zaslav doing exactly the same as he always does. If I literally wasn't a person who needed to watch these movies for the sake of my job, I would just full on be boycotting Warner Brothers at this point. What a sorry excuse for a company. Completely lost their way of what even is the point of being in this industry. Yeah, this one is still an open wound. Being one of the most recent cancellations, this is highly in demand. The quality apparently holds up, but I'm going to be a tad reserved and place it just at number 3. My only bias putting it below Popeye is because it's 2D, and that quirky 3D animation style just isn't the Coyote way. But by no means is it a major detriment. I still eagerly await someone to leak it one day. It'll happen. Maybe. And so, onto our final cancellation showcase of today, aiming for the number 7 slot, it is Treasure Planet. Yes, today we are covering the cancelled Treasure Planet sequel, Treasure Planet 2, the fan favorite of sequel projects that will absolutely never happen. Or will it? So yes, this is a cancelled project I've seen murmured around in the internet for ages now, as they were legitimately developing a sequel to the movie before even the first one had actually come out. A very daring and ambitious project, to say the least. It had the bare bones of a story all worked out, a reunion of Jim and John Silver, and a villain that would have been voiced by the Green Goblin himself, Willem Dafoe. However, even before the first movie's complete car crash at the box office, however tragic that may be, the movie's dubious status as most expensive traditionally animated movie of all time, combined with Disney's escalating steps towards CG animated movies, had basically signed the sequel's death warrant immediately. Even the studio's excessive habit of straight-to-video sequels couldn't really save this one. Though again, that's another suggestion I do get a lot, so let me know if you'd like me to cover those. Treasure Planet represented a failure that led to a turning point in the company that would change its animation output forever. When weighed up against its budget, it is often considered one of the most expensive box office failures of all time. With that much baggage going against it on such a fundamental level, it is no surprise that this corporation-rattling flop just never got its sequel. However, what would the sequel have been? What was the road to all of this mess, and has the movie's newfound cult classic status revitalized hopes for a follow-up of some form? Well, come join me as we go through just that very timeline. And perhaps we'll show some of the rare footage and images we have to prove that this project even existed in the first place. The story begins with a movie that actually saved Disney from its biggest flop of all. Treasure Planet may have failed, but it didn't almost destroy the studio like The Black Cauldron did. Good lord, they had a rough day at the office with this one. Black Cauldron was in production during another point of major Disney reshuffle, which brought in Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, and of course, art series regular Jeffrey Katzenberg. The movie's production was in so much turmoil that Katzenberg threw the hammer down on a brutalized cut of the film, removing a lot of the darker sequences. Unsurprisingly, the results may have been lighter, but they certainly hadn't made the movie better. Released in 1985, the movie very much cemented itself as the literal dark horse of the Disney repertoire.
Though I'd say it still holds a great deal more artistic merit than, say, Ralph Breaks the Internet, you know? The production was such a mess that many of the creative team moved to the other movie in development, that being The Great Mouse Detective, released in 1986. Now, while it made nowhere near the splash that The Little Mermaid, no pun intended, made, it managed to be a decently performing film that turned the post-Black Cauldron narrative around and get the studio on the road to recovery. But you may be asking, why is that exactly relevant to Treasure Planet? Well, that's because it was directed by Ron Clements and John Musker, the guys who would use their newfound studio savior status to embark on a 20-year battle to get Treasure Planet to the big screen. Yes, this duo would be the ones behind some of the great Disney movies going forwards from this point. Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, these two were the real deal. And with each success they had, they would take another swing at pitching their Treasure Island in Space movie to the studio. Literally right from the pre-Great Mouse Detective era, the first pitch of this was in 1985. So I guess you could argue that the production for this movie took 17 years, from 1985 to 2002. And throughout this journey, they would continually try and get it made each time they delivered another hit. And after Aladdin blew the roof off, they were particularly sure that they could get this damn thing made. And yet old Jeffrey Katzenberg just wasn't interested. Nonetheless, this time the two weren't having it. They went straight to Roy Disney, no less. Passing this on to Michael Eisner, it would soon be put into contract that they would be able to make the movie once they'd finished Hercules. And that's exactly what they did. One Hercules later, and they were ready to get cracking on the movie. However, between the contract being signed in 1995 and the movie going into production in 2000, one major thing had happened. Pixar's Toy Story. The movie that set the stage for the industry to change forever came out soon after that contract was signed. And though Disney continued to plow on with their traditional releases, it was beginning to become clear what the new gold rush was about to be. However, in many ways, this appeared to be in Treasure Planet's favor. Whilst not a bona fide CG movie, Musker and Clements were still looking to use a lot of it for the space sequences and creatures. To this day, the blending of the traditionally animated John Silver and his CG arm is commendable. However, with Disney in between the underwhelming performances of its own recent efforts and its taste of Pixar's immense levels of success, this would later come to curse the movie. Already, Emperor's New Groove and Atlantis had performed underwhelmingly by the studio's own standards, and the CG as the future narrative had already begun. It didn't matter that their first computer-animated effort, Dinosaur, had bombed, whilst Lilo and Stitch was a massive hit. That's the narrative that corporate were running with. Not to mention their complete humiliation in the face of Shrek's juggernaut success with its taste of now rival Katzenberg's desire to poke fun at Disney on full display. Whilst they'd had some warning shots from prior Dreamworks efforts, Shrek lit his green beacon that other studios could make money in the animation industry. It really was the signal that not only has Disney just lost its monopoly in the animated movie market, but that they were well behind of Dreamworks and, by proxy, their own collaborators like Pixar. And eventually they'd get there with Chicken Little, so, really a tumultuous time for Disney. But before then, they had to deal with these damn traditionally animated movies already in production. Thank you for making it halfway through this video. This is the part where I tell you to subscribe if you're interested in future cancelled videos. There are all sorts of other cancelled sequels and spin-offs based out of already existing franchises, so I think I'm going to go through them over the next few months. Let us know if any cancelled projects call out to you. But otherwise, I shall let you get back to the rest of the story of Treasure Planet and its cancelled sequel. Thanks for watching halfway through. But before then, they had to deal with these damn traditionally animated movies already in production. In hindsight, it did feel like the bigwigs were looking to bury this movie as a sacrificial lamb to get 2D animation out of the picture. I mean, they released it with Harry Potter the Chamber of Secrets, a James Bond movie, and Disney's own The Santa Claus 2. They put it up against their own movie. And yet, despite this apparent financial assassination attempt, they did have plans for the standard direct-to-video sequel and TV cartoon treatment for the movie. Which of course brings us to the cancelled sequel. Now, this was a model that had been kicked off with Aladdin and had only grown in success for Disney with The Lion King and later Lilo and Stitch. Hell, with the Lilo and Stitch spin-off content, they basically created their own version of Pokemon. So, despite this whole video giving the impression that the studio has hated this movie since that first pitch in 1985, they preemptively planned spin-off media for its potential success. They had already begun full-on developing this sequel. They had a story, a new main villain in Ironbeard, it was all ready to go. Better still, none other than Willem Dafoe was apparently going to voice this Ironbeard character, who I'm guessing would literally just be a cyborg version of Blackbeard. That's very much this property's MO, turning famous pirates into robots. If this franchise had taken off, we'd definitely be seeing a Jack Sparrow riff in the third one. Definitely a TV episode at least. Anyway, the story would have been Ironbeard becoming a big bad in the galaxy, causing a scenario that would be the reunion of Jim and John Silver, of course. Jim, by the way, would be happily attending the Royal Interstellar Academy, where I'm guessing it's just classes of how to cry, like the Matthew McConaughey meme. He would then be heading into this adventure with his new classmate and new love interest, Kate. Because, you know, they really fall through the character when she's just called his love interest in the premise. Jim, John Silver, and Kate would have assembled to stop Ironbeard before he releases all the inmates of Botany Bay Prison Asteroid. Yep, because you had to add an asteroid on the end to make it all the more out of spacey. This would have been interesting, though I do also think that it would have been very much remembered as a passable Disney DVD, as opposed to anything more profound. The idea of a sequel to Treasure Planet has loomed on the internet for a while, and I'm sure there are all sorts of grandiose imaginations that fans have thought onto it. But this does seem to be a premise for just a very simple DVD sequel, you know what I mean? And let's be honest, the reason why this sequel is so sought after is purely because it didn't happen. But evidently, they weren't thinking that whilst they were still making the movie, and by proxy, developing its sequel at the same time. To be fair, the production team may have had a good reason to legitimately think that this movie was going to take off. They did give it a solid marketing push after all. I mean, they launched the first trailer to play alongside Star Wars Attack of the Clones, which surely should have gotten its part of the audience. And Hasbro made toys, for God's sake. Even now, I still remember the McDonald's Happy Meals campaign where you could collect different bits of Ben the Robot. Kinda gross, I guess, that they were beckoning kids to have like 9 Happy Meal toys to make this robot, but hey, that's its own marketing problem from the McDonald's side of things. Also, can't complain too much on this one, as McDonald's gave my very first acting job at a very young age. I don't know how well known that is nowadays, but yeah, that's me in a McDonald's advert. I was a very active 6-year-old kid in London. Anyway, as we'd go on to learn, even the very capable hands of the McDonald's marketing team just couldn't have saved this movie. Considering its $140 million price tag, its total of $110 million gross was just crushing. The movie tanked, and Disney traditional animation department was retired one home on the range later. It still boggles me that these two eras of Disney are conjoined by two farm-centric movies, with Chicken Little coming out after that. However, as the internet very much made sure of, life for Treasure Planet would not end there. On home media, and though I hate giving it credit very much, on Disney Plus as well, this thing is now a certified cult classic. Almost 22 years on, this movie is now the darling of animation YouTube. Despite its flaws, it's pretty universally recognized as a great movie that just didn't get its due. Its more radical reinvention of a classic tale paved the way for later efforts such as Rapunzel and the Snow Queen before Tangled and Frozen. Its fascinating blend of period clothing and steampunk in a sci-fi setting remains unique even to this day. And the core relationship between Jim and John Silver is now often commended for improving on the original source material. As for whether Disney has noticed the fact, I think they have some idea. As just last year in the 100-year anniversary short, Jim Hawkins got a nice individual shot gliding down the corridors of Disney animation. Beyond that, they were certainly not shy on the merchandise for the movie's 20th year anniversary either, as they gave Jim and John Silver their own Christmas ornament for God's sake. Whilst I don't think they'd risk another theatrical movie, I could definitely see more recent successes along the lines of X-Men 97 spurring on finally getting a series done or something. Do it properly, and you could get a really good series out of the Treasure Planet universe for Disney+. It would also make for one of the better live-action remake ideas, though I have no interest in spurring them on to do more of those. Though I guess we'll see if the outcome of that photorealistic Mufasa will really change my mind. That's what I think at the very least. That is the full timeline of the Treasure Planet franchise. and the unfortunate cancelling before it could even really begin that is the cancelled Treasure Planet sequel. And that is all. My 2D, 3D biases are very clear, but this was just a straight-to-DVD sequel anyway. Would have been nice to expand the franchise, but it's not the end of the world. And you may have noticed we didn't cover a single Pixar project. Don't worry, I know there's some gems there as well, but there's enough from that single studio to actually band them all together into a separate compilation. So look forward to that sometime in the future. Or else this video would end up being like 40 hours long. Believe it or not, I was originally going to put over 30 cancelled projects into this one video. So after talking so much about alternate timelines, take it as a blessing that you didn't quite get that one just yet. Maybe one day I'll release the 20-hour edit. For now, I'll be ending things off there. My name's been Daz, thank you very much for reaching the end of this video, hope you enjoyed your hot chocolate if you had one, and I shall see you all in a little bit.